by.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. You are live, you are live.
Morning, or should I say g'day to you there in New South Wales, Australia, the Taronga Zoo and the Western Plains Zoo, if I've got that correct. You are most welcome to this, our very early, well, it's supposed to be a morning, it's kind of middle of the night here, but the hyenas are calling behind us, the baboons are waking up off behind where you're sitting now. And to my left, of course, is not a baboon or a hyena, but Stefan Winterboer.
Good morning.
And my name is James, and we're here to chat to you about World Environmental Day. Now, it's not only the Australians of Taronga Zoo and Western Plains Zoos that are with us. We have people around the world joining us for Safari Live this morning, a sort of early version of the normal game drive. Brent and Jamie are out on drive, frantically searching the reserve with their spotlights to see maybe there'll be some creatures of the night. And we must welcome especially Hayden Turner, who set this all up for us, and it's great. We initially were quite nervous to get out of bed at 3:30 in the morning, of course, but then we realized that the chances of seeing a suite of animals that we might not see normally is always there. So that's a very good thing. Now, immediately off the bat, we have a question from Hayley, and I'll get to your question now, Hayley. But everybody, please do talk to us. Hashtag Safari Live on Twitter, or questions at wildearth.tv. That's the general idea here. You're on a live it is a fireside chat, I suppose, in the morning, and you'll shortly be on a live game drive. And so any questions about Africa or South Africa and related to the particular topic of World Environmental Day will be much appreciated. So that's the idea. Hayley, you want to know what the best part of our jobs is. Well, apart from getting up at 3:30 in the morning, I'm going to throw this one over to Stefan so that you might hear his sultry, velvety voice for the first time this morning.
Well, good morning, everybody, firstly. I know, James, I think the best part of the job is probably that early morning coffee right now. I think it's a nice time of the day. It always feels a bit fresh, sunrise, turning the sky a different color, and I don't know, there's always just something fresh about a new morning. You get to hear what's going on. There's lions roaring in the distance as we speak. There was one walking through camp last night. It just gives us sense of purpose to a morning. That's probably about my favorite thing about the job.
Certainly gives a sense of excitement and expectation. The dawn is the kind of expectation time in the bush, and now I'm sure you are all expectantly wanting to see what's going on actually out in the wild. We are out in the wild, but we're not moving. So let's hand you over to Jamie Paterson, and she'll tell you exactly what her plan is for the next few hours.
Good morning and welcome to the Taronga and Western Plains Zoo and all of the rest of our viewers across the globe, and welcome to our sunrise safari in the dark. My name is Jamie, and this morning I have the wonderful Brian Joubert on camera with me, and together we will be heading out to find you all of the exciting things that happen at this hour just before dawn, the darkest time out here in the bush, and also somewhat chilly. So chilly, in fact, that I've got my incredibly wonderful, thank you Kirsty, who is in final control, my wonderful beanie on, that has led some viewers to express concern that I might be carried away by a bird of prey due to the ridiculous pom-pom sitting on my head. Now, that would certainly go viral. Now, Val, you were wondering about what the hardest part of our job is. Belle was wondering what the hardest part of our job is. Sure, that's a difficult question. There you go. That's the hardest part of our job. There are so many wonderful things about this job that the hard parts seem to sort of fade into insignificance. There's always the little stresses and niggles when something breaks, or a flat tire, or whatever else happens to be a reality of life in the bush. And I guess sometimes dealing with the harshness of nature and the interaction between human beings and the wilderness area, that for me is probably one of the hardest aspects of this job. But other than that, I definitely can't complain. It's always exciting, especially heading out at this time in the morning, because you just don't know what's going to be down the road. Last night I was coming back from an exhausting, speaking of hard parts of the job, an exhausting trip into our nearest town to buy us some supplies for various exciting projects. And I was coming back in the dark at 6 o'clock. And as I was driving from the gate towards the camp, I just spotted some eyes right in the distance. And our dominant male leopard, the biggest leopard that we have in this area, Tingana, came walking down the road towards me. Slow, steady, just padding down the road to come and have a look. And he passed so close to my vehicle. Oh, my hat's fallen off already. He passed so close to my vehicle that he practically rubbed his cheek against the bumper. And I was looking down at him from my perspective. I was looking down from the window straight into his gorgeous, luminous eyes. It was a magical moment. Ooh. I've just come across to the waterhole to see what we can see, but all is quiet here on the top northwestern corner of Djuma at Sydney's Dam. So while we continue a check of the northern boundary, go and see if we can't find those lions that were calling all through the night, let's head over to Brent and Willem so that they can also say good morning to you.
Welcome to literally deepest, darkest Africa on this before sunrise safari. My name is Brent Smith. I have Willem on camera with me, and it is pretty cold, but we're out here. And what's really exciting about being out at this time of the morning, which we don't do often, is that 75% of your more interesting mammal species are only out in the hours of darkness. And there is maybe a little bit of friendly competition this morning to see who can find the elusive aardvark. Now, being out at this time is probably our best chance at finding some of those weird and wonderful nocturnal creatures. Sometimes it is a little bit quiet though. Of course, we're not able to shine our torches or spotlights onto any of the diurnal species. With the makeup of their eyes, it tends to blind them slightly, and we're here to observe, not to interfere. So we won't help a predator or prey. Well, a very good morning to Bex, and Bex is wondering, while eating her lunch in the middle of the day, Sydney, what animals are we most wanting to see at this time of the morning? Well, it's going to be your small and interesting nocturnal mammals, as well as your big hairies and scary carnivores. So any of the small mammals, a civet, white-tailed mongoose, honey badger, as I said, aardvark, pangolin even possibly, all very rare to see. Then of course the lion, leopard, hyena. So we'll just have to get out there. Willem and I are checking an area where we had female leopard tracks yesterday. We're trying to make sure she hasn't moved further to the west. We've got two different females that have cubs at the moment, and they both operate from here to the east. And if we get no luck there, I think we might head to the sort of northeast and give Jamie a hand with those lions. Now we're making a massive racket throughout the night, and of course, as soon as we get going, silence. But really exciting to have the Taronga Zoo with us, and happy 100-year birthday, guys. That's really, really an amazing feat. But while we continue to scour through the dark, let's go back to Commander Bond, who's sitting nice and happy, much warmer than us, next to the fire.
Yes, I suppose we probably are a bit warmer, the wind not rushing through our faces like it is with Brent Leo Smith. At least he has the locks around his head to keep his head warm. Now, a wonderful question from Kirsty about pangolins, which of course is a very good way to bring up the topic of World Environmental Day. Pangolins, of course, are the most illegally trafficked mammals in the world. Not the African version of it, but before we get onto it, I just want to show you quickly a clip of said pangolin the other day.
Isn't that incredible? Look at that, a pangolin. Isn't this exciting? He's just laid down. This is my first pangolin in the northern Sabi Sands. Look at him. Look at those armor plates. Now, if you get your finger stuck in there, it can actually cut you. Look at him. So, these short grass areas are home to the pugnacious ant, and 98% of a pangolin's diet is a pugnacious ant. Dave, well spotted.
Now, Brent's excitement there is well founded. We don't often see pangolins here, of course. That's the African version of it. You do get another tree pangolin in the northern, or the central parts of Africa, don't you? And I think it's the Asian version of the pangolin that is probably the most trafficked animal. Still, that pangolin is used out here, isn't it, for traditional medicine? Do you know particularly for what?
I don't actually. Yeah. It's got something to do with the rain in some instances, and then they use them in jewelry as well. So they thread a hole through the scales, and they use them as ornaments in jewelry. But yeah, as to exactly what they're used for outside of Africa and what makes them so desirable, I don't know. Yeah.
Very nice question there. I think it was from Simon. Is that correct, Kirsty? Yes, Simon. Simon, you want to know if our government is, or governments around Africa are particularly efficient when it comes to sort of prosecuting and supporting the prosecution of poaching. Simon, I think that relatively, I think that's not really where the problem lies for me. For me, the problem lies in this nexus or articulation between where you've got conflicted areas. You've got areas in Africa that are supposed to be protected, and all around them you've got huge numbers of very poor people. Now, if we look at the history of conservation, certainly in Africa, and I don't know much about it in the rest of the world, but I think it is fairly similar. You know, let's take the Kruger National Park. The Kruger National Park was proclaimed finally in 1926, if I'm not mistaken, but its precursor, the Sabi National, or the Sabi Game Reserve, was proclaimed in 1898. That's correct, isn't it? Now, the reason for that was the denuded number of game in the area. It was decided that the animals of the area had been denuded to the extent that they needed some kind of protection. Now, the local people were not the ones responsible for that. It was the white settlers who came in with their guns and their greed, basically, and their need to sell ivory around the place, and certainly the market created by the white settlers that denuded this area of elephants. And I read one account that said when the Sabi Game Reserve was finally proclaimed in 1898, there were probably about 10 elephants in the area. Now just think about that, 10 elephants in an area. The Sabi Game Reserve was about half the size of the Kruger Park, so it was probably about 10,000 square kilometers, a fairly big piece of land. 10 elephants, that's one elephant per 1,000 square kilometers. It wasn't the local people involved in that. And yet, when they fenced out the park and they started removing people out of the protected area, it wasn't the white settlers they took out, it was the people who had been deriving a living from the park for a long time. And so this happened throughout Africa, and it's created a sense of resentment in some cases, and it's certainly created a sense of disempowerment in many cases. So no matter how brilliant your law enforcement is, no matter how supportive your government is of prosecution, until you sort that articulation out, where you've got these poverty-stricken people living on the borders of a potential resource, that's where we're going to have the problem. And so that's the kind of issue I think that we need to be thinking about. Steph?
That and also the fact that where animals come from quite often is not advertised where the market for the final product is. Let's take rhino horn, for instance. Rhinos are poached and killed in South Africa. They're then turned into a powder, and that powder is then sold in markets all over the world. But there's very little information there for the local people to be able to accurately judge, what am I buying here? They're buying a medicine or a vial of powder. They don't really know where it comes from. There's no real connection between them and the animal. So there's no emotional or emotion attached to that. That needs to be created as well. So on the market side as well, people need to be made aware that animal products or the derivatives of animal products, and it's not, rhino horn is obviously just one very prominent one, but it's where you know, down to where you get your food from. You know,
Yeah.
it's all
plants.
good. It is. It's all good questions to ask. You know, for yourselves that are sitting far away and in other countries, it's a good thing to ask yourself, what am I buying? Where does it come from? Is it sustainably used? You know, I think that is also a message that everyone can sort of practice.
It's a very nice point. So, I mean, whether it's rhino horn or whether it's a tomato that you're buying at the local supermarket, where is it grown? How is it created, and how did it get to where it is? So going on to a question from Beck there about what Australians can do to stop the illegal ivory trade, I don't know. I mean, not buy it, obviously, but I think spreading the message is the big thing. That so the Western world, of course, with technology, and I use the term Western in the loosest possible sense. I just mean areas, the first world, if you like. We've got technology. We've got the ability to communicate, and I think communication is the big thing. But I also think that there needs to be communication around what it is that national parks are, what it is that protected areas are, how they were created. Because I hear huge amounts, and we get comments, of course, from all over the world, and some of them we don't read out live, and some of them we do. And quite often, there's a misunderstanding, I think, of where the problem lies. And it is a holistic problem. It's not a question of shooting the poachers on site. It's a question, yes, of course there needs to be security on site. There's got to be effective prosecution. There's got to be a reduction of markets. There has to be some kind of education that goes into local communities. But it comes, I think, for me, and I don't know this for sure because I'm certainly not an expert in it, and there are many people around the world that are doing their level best to try and stop this trade. But for me, it comes down to conscious living. What are you eating? Where does it come from? So every time, for example, I like to use this example. When you turn your kettle on, right? We were sitting in World Environmental Day, so this is relevant. If you turn your kettle on, it's a baboon or something in a tree.
I think it's important that we stay aware of the fact that we're not just sitting next to a fire in the middle of some...
Yes, in a studio. Yeah. Anyway, so when you put your kettle on to boil water for your tea, and you're sitting in a home that is perhaps centrally heated, I know in Australia you don't need much central heating, but perhaps you've got a heater on somewhere, and perhaps you're going to go and sit on a deck outside where there's either some light or there's a wooden floor that's come from somewhere. Your consumption of energy in the first world, just by making that one cup of coffee and going to sit down there, is probably 10 times the daily energy consumption of a family of 5 or 6 people that live in a rural area without those kind of facilities. And what often happens is that people have this impression that rural Africans or rural Asians or rural South Americans or wherever they are denuding areas. So we go into a natural area like this and we see people chopping down a tree with a machete and we think, oh, look at these people, you know, they just don't understand. Here they are destroying the forests, destroying the area, you know, with their machetes, you know, they're just not consciously thinking about what they're doing. Well, is that really true every time you push down the toaster or turn the kettle on? So it's a really multifaceted problem, and I think in the first world we don't really have an appreciation of exactly the complexity of those problems. Behind us, the hyenas are calling. Let's go and see if Jamie Paterson has managed to find one of them.
While you were with Mr. Hendry, Brian and myself have been investigating the northern boundary of Djuma, and I have found, to my not real astonishment, that there are lion tracks of one big male lion walking west, so in the opposite direction to what I'm driving, but walking west along the boundary. Now, tracking at this sort of time of night is particularly difficult. My apologies, I'm just double checking what I'm seeing. Because having a look at the tracks without the light makes things a bit more tricky. And that also doesn't help that an entire herd of elephants has come wandering through at some point in the night. We've been seeing more and more elephants, and they've stomped all over my lion tracks, but we'll be heading back. I'm going to do a big loop and then head back in that direction. Now, Emma, you would like to know what my most extraordinary wildlife experience would be. And that is such a difficult question to answer, but I'll have to go with a job that I had previously, and it's tough. I mean, there are so many. We've had the most incredible experiences recently with the Queen of Djuma, a leopard called Karula, and her cubs that fall very, very high up on my sort of ratings of wildlife experiences. But Emma, I'll have to tell you a story about a place where I used to work, where we spent probably about, I would say, 6 out of 7 days looking for rhino at least once a day. Different types, and because it was a closed system, I knew each and every rhino individually by name. And one day, very sadly, I was walking and found Panga, Meshuggah, and Gonzalez, 3 rhino.
The U.S.
In the aftermath of a poaching incident. Now, as you can imagine, that's the distressing part of the story, but it starts to make sense. If you can imagine what we felt like after that, having monitored those animals for months and months and months, and got to know each and every one of them. And I found it particularly distressing, and I got to the point where I actually didn't want to see the rest of the rhino in that area just because it made me so incredibly sad. However, I went on a walk one day, and I started walking along following tracks, and I came upon a young female called Ganda Ganda. Now, Ganda Ganda means tractor. A young female white rhinoceros, aptly named Tuku Tuku Tuku. Ganda Ganda is the local name. And Ganda Ganda was standing there, and all of a sudden, between her and myself, I was on foot, this tiny little head popped up with these enormous oversized ears, and she'd had her very first baby, her first calf in her lifetime. Precious little girl, and this thing was still stumbling. It was only a couple of days old, still stumbling, and it came wandering towards me with all the trust in the world in its eyes. And it made not everything better, but it certainly helped. And she is alive and well. Her mom has now had another calf, and she's off on her own exploring as a young female rhino is wont to do. Her name, we never actually named her in the end. We originally thought about calling her May because she was born in May. But that to me was my most fantastic wildlife experience because it was about hope more than anything else. It was hope for the future. And then shortly after that, or just before that actually, we found Belega's calf, and the population started to recover themselves. And none of the rhino in that area have been poached since. So a happy end to that story. I think that would be my most fantastic wildlife experience. However, the list just keeps building, and that's what's so exciting about this, is there's just so much out here to see. And as the drought sort of closes its fist in this area, it is getting more and more difficult. The animals struggling for food, not necessarily water, but definitely struggling for food. And they're starting to move out of the Kruger National Park and towards the Sabi Sands. So the Kruger National Park is to the east of us. And there's very little water and very little food left in that particular area. So the animals are all coming this way, which is why we're seeing, having spoken about those elephant tracks, which is why we are seeing such an influx of elephants, for one, and other animals. But for the predators, these are the dog days, so to speak. The best time for them. The animals all forced around water holes, all forced into sort of limited areas, and the predators taking full advantage of that. Now we've got brand new leopard cubs, we have brand new lion cubs in our traverse area, so all is very, very exciting. The reason I'm not immediately following those lion tracks is there's just one set. In other words, only one of the male lions walked along that road. There are 4 of them, 4 that Hayden would be most familiar with, the Birmingham boys. And Hayden actually termed the phrase, or coined the phrase, the Birmingham boys. So that's who we're looking for this evening. Right, while we continue our search for lions and other creatures of the evening, let's head back to James in the tent.
Hello everybody. Belle, a very nice question from you about whether or not our viewers and the guests that come to this area are changed and whether their attitudes to wildlife are changed by being here or by viewing the show. Well, just to clarify for those of you who perhaps don't know, we sit in the Sabi Sands, which is 60,000 hectares, and many of the sort of small private reserves on the Sabi Sands, which are unfenced between each other, contain commercial safari lodges, and Steph and I cut our teeth at many of these commercial lodges down to the south of where we are now. And, well, I think your question's a good one. I'm going to hand it over to Steph to give his impressions first, and then I'll tell you what I think.
Well, Belle, I don't think, I mean, without getting too deep into how people feel, I think the most noticeable thing is I think people come here and have a safari that's not just about looking at animals. They come here and they experience the place. And when you go and experience a place, you can't help but be changed by it. You can't help but be changed by the fact that, you know, South Africa is a wonderful place and wilderness areas are wonderful, and, you know, you just, wonder comes to mind if I want to describe what most people leave here with. And then the sense to come back, I think, is also an overwhelming sensation. Very rarely do we have people that come out to areas like this and say, I never want to come back, it was the most terrible experience of my life. I think probably in all the years we've been doing this, a handful of times. So I think, a sense of wanting to come back, wanting to participate, wanting to do something, you know, but by far and wide, I think people do go home and open their eyes to the fact that there's a greater world out there, and it's not just through a medium like you're watching right now. You know, you actually have to get there and stick your toes in the sand and, you know, sweat a bit
and get a thorn in your foot, perhaps. Yes. I think for me, it's such an important thing that tourists come out here, that they come and they see what we have to offer. And I mean, the lodges out here are generally fairly expensive, but you can go to the Kruger National Park and drive yourself around. And if you're operating on the Australian dollar or the American version thereof or a British pound, it costs you virtually nothing to come out here. I mean, compared with a holiday that you could have anywhere else around Europe, for example, or America or Australia, it really is virtually nothing, virtually free, with the exchange rate the way it is at the moment. It's not good. Anyway, the thing is, though, do people come out here and they see some amazing things? They take some great pictures and they go home and they're amazed by the elephants and the lions and the leopards and the buffalo and the giraffe and the wild dogs if they're really lucky, and the cheetah perhaps as well. But do they leave with a sense of connection to the wild? And that, for me, is the crucial thing. And I think some people do, and I think certainly with WildEarth, that's what we're trying to achieve, is to give people a deeper connection to the wilderness, so that they have a sense of the wild and they have a sense that there's something worth preserving. And it's my hope that people who come out here, and I know a lot of the lodges do this, that they are connected with the wildlife and they're connected with the people that live outside as well. Because without that, I'm going to bang on about it for quite a while, without that, it's pointless them going home and saying, we saw all the elephants and the elephants are so beautiful, we need to save them. But you've got to understand what that actually means. Right, so while you ponder that extremely deep topic, let's head across to Brent Smith and find out if he's tracking something.
We're sitting here next to one of the only natural seeps in this part of the northern Sabi Sands. And around me, you can see how the elephants have dug it up. And there is actually water right at the bottom there, but it's very, very little. And the ellies will come back and dig here. Now, this is right on the base of a seep line, which is a really important sort of natural thing out here. But I'll speak a little bit more about that shortly. Now, the most interesting thing about that is most of the Sabi Sands used to be, after failed cattle ranching, became sort of private hunting land for a lot of wealthy landowners. And this particular seep has probably been here for the last couple of 100 years. And if we follow my torch, and we go up into this marula tree, there's the remnants of an old tree house. Tree house is a strong word. It was actually a hunting platform. So they built a flat platform. The hunters used to lie up there and wait for animals to come to the only little bit of water that would have been in this area during the dry season. And it's amazing to think that was probably still in use in the 70s. But now, no hunting everything is conservation based in Sabi Sands. There's no active hunting of anything. And I just find it incredible that in such a short time there's been such a positive change. And seep lions are one of my little pet passions around here, and they're very important because a lot of people don't understand about why certain areas hold animals and why certain areas don't. So it's all great having a large swathe of land, but whether that's going to hold animals or not is a different question. And the reason for that is that you can kill an animal in a field of grass if it's the wrong type of grass. And I know Taronga's got to leave us, so it's been great having you. And hopefully we'll see you again on the safaris. But Western Plains is continuing on with us, so I'm going to just finish up my little seep lion story. So what seep lions are lateritic soils, and that means it's sand on top of clay. And that's the lateral or natural lateral movement of water from the high ground down. Now these areas not only hold the best grass species, so have the highest carrying capacity, they also hold the water. And animals like elephants are able to access the water, and accessing that water creates little sort of almost oases in a very dry area. So you'll find, I found porcupine have been drinking out of there. You'll find a lot of other little animals, a lot of herbivores as well, will all focus on these areas specifically in the dry season because they are holding the best grass and the most water. Now when you look for the best grass, you find the most herbivores. Where you find the most herbivores, you find the most predators. So we are still in search, hopefully, of a big cat. And let's continue on. Ooh, chilly, chilly. Ooh. Well, okay, before we move on, and quite often it's more important to use your ears to find animals specifically in the dark. And speaking of big cats, Dr. Larry would like to know, how do you identify individual leopards? Now, a lot of people use, I know with camera trap stuff, they use the different spots on the side. Fortunately, our leopards are relaxed enough that we don't need to try to work out little individual spots. So we use, let's just find it here quickly. There's a nice easy one. The last line of spots above the whiskers. So there, she's actually a 4-4 female. So she's got 4 spots above the whiskers and 4 spots. You read from right to left. Of course, 4-4, you can read both ways. So that's the best and easiest way. It's like a little fingerprint in each individual leopard. But as you spend more time with the leopards, you are able to almost identify them immediately just from their body shape, size. Also, where you see them plays a very important role. And if you spend a lot of time like we do in a single area, you are able to work out to a degree, not exactly, because the big cats forgot to read the guidebook, so they can do whatever they want. But to a degree, what area you're most likely to find certain individuals in. Now, we've got to be careful here. There's lots of little elephant excavations. We don't want to fall into one of those and get stuck. While Vim and I continue our search for nocturnal critters, let's go back to James, who's sitting toasty by the fire.
And toasty by the fire we most surely are. That, did you notice the little hint of jealousy there in Brent Leo Smith's voice? Ah, shame. Ah, well, here we are, Stefan and I, toasting by the fire quietly. And Julia, you want to know about other endangered species that are here and the most rare animals that we get. Well, I like this question because it's actually not that simple to answer. We could easily answer and say, well, the most rare mammal that we get around here, of course, would be the African wild dog, perhaps. And maybe, if we were very lucky, a black rhino, and perhaps even cheetah would be considered very rare. But the rarest animal that we get here, Steph?
That's a good question. The rarest animal that you get here is probably the African wild dog, I want to say. Or cheetah, perhaps, is one of the two that comes to mind immediately. But they're the most prominent ones. I think the rarest mammal in South Africa is probably one of the golden moles. which is they're just a small population that are very isolated in certain areas, and they certainly are up there in probably the top 5. You'll find a couple of spots by golden moles. But I think the most important thing about the rarest animals is not really animals, but it's wilderness areas.
Yeah.
The lack thereof is what's causing the decline in species, and we're just noticing it with species with a very wide home range first, basically.
And certainly the iconic animals are the poster children, if you like, of the conservation movement. But remember, they're probably insects going extinct all over the world, all the time, every day, that we don't know about, some of which have never been described and will never be described by science. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But in terms of rare animals, yes, we like to think of the wild dogs and the cheetahs and the elephants and the black rhino as the poster children, and they're extremely valuable. But we need to consider, of course, those little things, the golden moles, whose role in ecology is almost unknown. We don't even know what they're doing. I mean, sitting right where we are now, under us and all around us, an unbelievable mass of termites knocking about the place, doing incredibly valuable work for ecosystem function. And it's very important, of course, that we sort of bring that knowledge to people. And I think that's one of the values of Safari Live. And we've been chatting a lot to schools recently, some in South Africa, many in Virginia Beach, Virginia, on the east coast of the United States. Hayden's done some stuff with the United Kingdom, and he's talked to colleges there and universities, and I know he's going to be doing a whole lot more of that in August to a whole lot of schools and I think universities in Australia. And that kind of interaction, I think that's the value, I hope that's the value of what we do for conservation, is that we do give people that connection, but in a holistic fashion. So yes, the chances are you'll come on safari with us and you'll see lions, and you may even be lucky enough to see a leopard with her cubs. But when you're not looking at that stuff, there's so many other tiny little things that we're able to show you. And Steph, of course, does a huge amount on foot out here. And he has an unbelievable eye for spotting tiny little pieces of the ecology out here, without which, I mean, if you remove, say, a mantis species from this area, that mantis that lives on those Waltheria flowers, if you were to remove that mantis from this area, what knock-on effect would it have? We don't know. It might have almost no effect. It might just affect the plant that it helps to pollinate. It might create a knock-on effect that would eventually result in the extinction of an entire plant species or maybe even a mammal species. So I think that's the kind of when we talk about rare animals, it's a lovely topic because it can invoke all sorts of other kinds of topics. Let's find out what Jamie's doing and see if she's managed to find any nocturnal creatures of the night.
I hear that you were having a discussion with James about various rare animal species, and I have to tell you that Brian and myself are embroiled in a competition with Brent and Wiem to see which of us can find an aardvark in the early hours of the morning. Now, unfortunately, I fear as though Brian might be on the wrong team here, because unfortunately I seem to have something of an aardvark, I don't know what I'd call it, maybe some kind of aardvark repellent. I have yet to see, despite having grown up in South Africa and having worked in this industry for many years, and in the Kalahari, where aardvark sightings are pretty much a given every single night, I have yet to see a live aardvark in the wild. That is my goal as well for this morning's drive, to see if we can't figure out where they might be. And I've driven all along the roads where I see their tracks regularly, their fresh digging marks. And so far they are letting me down, or at least they're just elsewhere. We're traveling along the now eastern boundary of the reserve. It's amazing how the lions use these boundary roads as basically as a sort of a pathway to get from A to B. The lions in particular enjoy doing that, and it makes sense when you think about the fact that otherwise they would have to walk through the trees, which at the moment will be quiet. The dew hasn't settled properly yet, but they will be wet in the next few hours. Plus it's noisy, plus it's a little bit uncomfortable having to duck and dive around the bushes. So they will be walking along on the road. And Joey, in Australia, you were wondering if we have porcupines out here in the Sabi Sand, and yes we do, in theory. Again, Another animal that I've seen lots of tracks for, but I haven't yet managed to get on the live drives. And Joey, if you don't believe me, I have evidence, because you know I just happen to keep it lying around. Just here for a second so I can show you what I'm talking about. There we go, a porcupine. I'll try and illuminate this a little bit better. A nice large porcupine quill, the largest rodent in South Africa. And you've got the black and white coloration. And I'm going to flip it over so that you can have a look. Ah, that's quite distressing. I was going to say so that you can have a look at the sharp point. But the sharp point has been somewhat mangled at some point while it's been riding about in the vehicle with us. So we see these every now and again, and we wait in eager anticipation, or at least I wait in eager anticipation for my first porcupine sighting. These quills, once they are, turn my spotlight off for a moment, they sort of obviously wedged into the porcupine's skin. Now, instead of being able to shoot out the quills, which is something that it's sort of been a rumor or an old wives' tale about porcupines, that they kind of fire them out like spears or something similar, or javelin. It's not how it works at all. So basically what will happen is when a porcupine feels threatened, and because these are modified hairs, they have the muscles attached to them, just like when we get goosebumps. When a porcupine feels threatened, the muscles contract and the porcupine quill raises, so it becomes a weapon. Now imagine a whole body full of these serious spines, and then what happens is the porcupine will turn its back on the threat, bristle, and then rush backwards in a sudden stabbing motion. And that's why you quite often see lions, leopards, any animal that's been a little bit foolish in terms of their approach to porcupines, finding quills embedded in their cheeks. And because they are slightly barbed, getting them out again can be an incredibly uncomfortable experience. And here's a fascinating thing about porcupines. Despite their body armory that they have, and they're very, very effective, a porcupine pair is monogamous and mates once a day, at least, very, very carefully, to maintain that pair bond. But there you go, Joey, just something I happen to have lying around. We're going to continue on in the meantime. Let's find out how Brent's Mahindra sunrise safari is going.
Well, we've covered most of our southern boundary. We've been looking for tracks of a female leopard. It doesn't look like she's crossed in just yet. So I'm hoping we might find elephant tracks. So elephants make finding a lot of the big cats a little bit more difficult because of their obliterate them. So we're hoping we've missed her tracks and she's already inside Djuma. So we're going to go check one of her favorite hangouts here in the southeast, and one of my favorite roads. Now we are suffering because this little road runs along what we call a drainage line, or a donga, which is basically a small dry river system. Very important, especially going into this drought we have. It's one of the areas where our evergreen trees normally grow, and also it's got a slightly higher water table, so slightly more grass cover than the rest of the areas. So we are hoping that because of the grass cover and the evergreens, there might be some herbivores resting in the area that might attract some predators. Also, a wonderful place to look for porcupine, which Jamie was just chatting about, as they tend to gnaw on quite a few of the root systems of those evergreen trees. We are going to continue on our chilly search for the big cats of Djuma Private Game Reserve. While we do that, let's go back and get warm next to the fire with James.
He is banging on a bit about the fact that we're warmer than him, isn't he? Shame, poor little fellow. Anyway, you know, that's his lot in life, to freeze his long locks off in the wilderness all alone. Well, he's not alone, of course, he's with Brian, who's also freezing his long locks off. Zoe, a nice question from you. You say there seems to have been a groundswell or some kind of increase in awareness worldwide for wildlife. And do we feel that too? Do we think that we're getting through to people? Zoe, I mean, I think certainly the number of viewers we have goes up.
Monthly.
Elephants making a noise next to us. It goes up on a monthly basis. Are people more aware? I think with social media they must be more aware of things. And of course, unfortunately, on the internet, you know that very little is actually vetted. And so while for every piece of good information there is on the internet, you can probably find a piece of bad information on the internet. But I think the collective knowledge of people will filter that kind of nonsense out. And I think you will definitely find that there is an increase of awareness. And certainly out in these rural areas where there are no telephones, there's very little electricity, there's almost no water, there's nothing in the way of sophisticated municipal services, medical care, schools, or anything like that. I mean, there are attempts at all of those things. But every single person out here has got a cell phone.
Yeah.
Somehow. I mean, there's 60% unemployment rate in some of these villages, but everyone's got a phone. Everyone's connecting to Facebook. Everyone's connecting to some sort of form of social media, and that is making a tremendous difference, I think, to conservation efforts. And I think it probably is where the seed of saving our natural areas will lie. Steph?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about a different thing because
Yeah.
I agree totally with what you're saying, but I also think that people are becoming more aware of the quality of the shows that are coming out of, you know, our quality is increasing all the time, and I'm sure the quality of documentaries that you have access to is, I mean, the things that we're going into and can see for entertainment value has the after effect of making us more aware at a level that actually works for conservation.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, for us to be in, and I think for many of our viewers, and they will tell you this, I imagine, that to do this in real time it's a different kind of experience, and I'm sure it must be slightly more connecting than watching a traditional documentary. Not that there isn't a place for traditional documentaries, because I still enjoy them very much, but this is just kind of another avenue, if you like. We're going to say goodbye to the Western Plains Zoos, and thank you very much for the work that you do. I know that zoos can be thought of as controversial places. I think they play a massive, massive role, especially in the research of endangered species and as perhaps the last repositories for some of the endangered species around the world. So thank you for the work that you do, introducing people to the wild and to animals, and perhaps sending them out here because they've been inspired by what you do. So thanks a lot, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Well, you're in Western Australia, of course. No, you're not. You're in New South Wales at Western Plains Zoos. Have a good day. Have a good afternoon. We're going to hand you back to Jamie for the next little while.
And so we continue into the dark mornings. What would I describe it as? Just into the dark morning, let's put it that way. And I'm still tracking lions. I've found where I think that male lion from earlier crossed into Djuma. And we're going to slowly follow his tracks west and see if maybe he's not still somewhere on the property. And hopefully one of them decides to give us a bit of a call so that we can narrow down exactly where they are. I know Brent said that he heard some lions calling to the south of our Traverse area, but that doesn't mean that it's all of the Birmingham boys together. So we're going to see if we can't track down where these lions have gone. I just want to check something quickly. Oh, testing our skills here, tracking in the dark. Oh no, apparently not my skill involved in keeping my earpiece in my ear. Oh no, I'm all tangled up now in my cord. I think it's hyena tracks that are wandering along here. I thought leopard for a second, but let's look a bit further ahead. No, it's hyena. Hyenas have been walking along this road. Can look surprisingly similar. They're about the right size for a leopard track, for a smaller hyena. They're difficult to tell the difference. I'm going to try and go along Nyala Road North. That was my plan, to just see. I think hopefully Rusty should have signal there. And we can go and investigate that drainage line system, because it's the perfect hiding place for a wandering aardvark. And the aardvarks are going to start already. What time is it? It's just after 5. It's close to 5:30. Already the aardvark are going to start thinking about heading for home. They generally, winter's a bit of an exception, but they generally try and make sure that they're back in their burrows long before the sun has started to rise. And that applies to quite a few of the nocturnal creatures. The bush babies as well. Long before we've detected any hint of a lightening of the sky, they start making their way back to where they plan on spending the rest of their day. And a good morning to Virginia in Kentucky. And Virginia, please forgive me while I answer your question. I'm going to try and fix the earpiece that is determined not to stay in my ear, despite best efforts and despite repeated readjustments. Oh, that's why it's hooked on the... There we go. That makes life a great deal easier. It helps when it's not hooked onto the seat and then pulling itself out. Virginia, you wanted to know what the newest species is to our area. Can I be really lame and say people? Human beings are the newest, almost actually, no. That may or may not be 100% true, because of course lions, hyenas and human beings all evolved together, but the truest human species is probably one of the most recently evolved and recently migrated species in this area. And I'm not talking about us as we drive along in our newly advanced cars. I'm talking about the original people of this area, so around the Stone Age times, the sort of even early Stone Age, where we've got all sorts of evidence, hand axes and those, what are they called? Where they crush grain. Oh, for goodness sake, my brain doesn't work this time of the morning, apparently. Grinding stones for maize. All of those sorts of evidence of primitive tools are around in these sorts of areas, and I think Brent even found a hand axe somewhere in one of the drainage lines of Djuma. So there is evidence of early humans, but they will be one of the latest additions to this evolutionary area. That being said, with the changes in climate and possibly with the drought, but I'm talking on a much larger scale, might start to see changes in the distribution of animals as well. Animals that we might not usually be seeing, and I'm thinking, to be honest, I'm actually thinking more along the lines of birds and insect species than I am about mammal species. Birds that might be more suited to, let's say, I'm not saying this is the case, but let's say, for example, a more temperate area, maybe even an area that is of a higher altitude might start to move into places like this, depending on food availability, or indeed away, but it just depends on how the climate continues to change. And there's a huge citizen research project at the moment in terms of recording the different bird species, and especially the migratory species, but all sorts of bird species, and trying to determine if they're arriving sooner or later, or if their distribution is changing according to changes, sort of meta changes in climate. So citizen projects that have been running for 20, 30 years at a time, because of course you can't really monitor a climate effect over the space of 2 years or 5 years. It's a very, very long-term change that they're looking at investigating. And oh my word, it just dropped 10 degrees. Did you feel that, Brian? Oh my goodness, we didn't even go downhill. What happened? Oh my goodness, my eyes instantly started watering as we came along around that corner. Sure. All right, let's find something so we can stop. No, actually, let's not stop. Let's go find a higher, warmer spot. Oof. And Phoebe in Manitoba, I must just say thank you so much for your incredibly kind message. I think it's one of the greatest joys of the job. So Phoebe sent us a thank you and for making a difference in terms of bringing this kind of knowledge and information to the public at large. And it's very much appreciated, Phoebe. I'm glad that it's aiding and enhancing the way that human beings understand their connection to the natural world. So thank you very much for that. I think it's one of my favorite things about this particular job is just the impact that we have, or at least the range of the impact that we can have. People across the globe. And because it's live, because it's happening in real life, it means that not that we ever would, but it does mean that we can't make anything up. Everything that you see is true to what is actually happening. There's no editing or scripting. We certainly wouldn't be able to, even if we wanted to. The animals write the stories for us, and it's just up to us to find them. And we're going into Inyala Road North now, speaking of finding animals, into the dip here. Maybe that's just why it got so cold as we went through. And I'm going to go looking for aardvark in Inyala North's drainage line system. So it's a river system that runs through Djuma. Some beautiful big jackalberries. While we investigate each and every large tree that is out here, including these, because they just look like such perfect leopard trees, let's head back to Brent and find out what his plans are.
So far, no luck with the tracks, but we are still on the hunt. Liam and I have a plan. We think the lions are going to start calling again soon, so we're going to try and make our way up towards the northern boundary around Gallagher shortcut and go sit up there and listen for a little bit, and hopefully the silence of the pre-dawn is broken with the roaring of male lions. Speaking of big cats, Joey in Australia is wondering, do the big cats ever come into the camp? Occasionally, we more likely get leopard close to the camp than lions, although the lions are very close, but the leopards sort of actually walk between the buildings of the camp. But we haven't had them in camp for quite a while. We've had them very close to camp. They're not in camp for a while. But over the years in the bush, I've had leopard in camp, lion in camp, wild dog in camp, hyena almost every night in camp. Even here, coming to see what it can scavenge. We have to lock away all the rubbish, otherwise the hyena will try to steal the whole bin. We're now going through a very chilly little spot at the bottom of the little drainage system that runs out of Buffle's Hook waterhole. As you can see, just on the edge of the light, there are lots of different trees and bushes and grasses in this area. And James Richard is wondering, are there any highly endangered ones in our area? And what are the conservation efforts that are used? Well, James, there are none in our area, so to speak. This is a mixed broadleaf woodland. We don't really have too many endangered species. The endangered species in this part of the world are normally species that are heavily utilized by man. So up in the mistbelt forests, yellowwood trees, stinkwood trees that were good for, the wood is very high quality. They are more often used and more often endangered. You're actually not allowed to cut them down anymore. And there's quite heavy protection on those different species. There are some endemic grasses, more flowers and plants. The Fynbos region of the Western Cape's got quite a lot, and there's heavy protection around them. But with all plant species, the biggest threat that faces them is generally overutilization, and then secondly, loss of habitat. Where there is, in our area, the tree species and areas pretty well protected with the greater Kruger and the private reserves. There might be one or two endemic species that are endangered, but that's more because they only occur in a very small area on one particular mountain in the Lubombos, one particular range of hills. But on average out here in the greater Kruger National Park, there are not too many endangered tree species. They're protected tree species such as jackalberries, timbuerties, leadwoods, but I wouldn't say they are endangered at all. So far, the hyenas have walked everywhere, but we haven't managed to see one yet. The only tracks we've come across so far Now, a lot of you might have noticed, for the first time ever in Safari Live history, something has happened today. And that tells you what the temperature's like out here. James, aka Commander Bond Hendry, is wearing long pants. And it's not a common occurrence. And I think it's quite fascinating that he is wearing long pants for the first time ever in Safari Live, on Safari Live. So it is history in the making. Apart from the 4:30 a.m. Central African time start, which is not nearly as interesting as the fact that James is wearing long pants. I think we're going to have to ask him a few questions about that. Now, I've seen some incredible sightings at this time of the morning. Now, I wasn't actually looking for sightings during them. So I used to live in Botswana. It was about 250 kilometers from town and the office to our camps on the Kwando River. And the vehicles used to come in every 6 or 7 months into town for a full service and whatnot. And then one of my jobs as a teenager, started doing it from about 16, was to drive them back out to camp. And to do this, because I didn't have a driver's license, I used to leave at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning for that very short period that I was driving on a main road where there was a possibility of encountering a police officer. But in northern Botswana, the chances of encountering a police officer between 3 and 6 in the morning is very slim. That's when I used to leave. And on the villages, on the outskirts of Maun, one of the slightly more humorous sightings I saw. But we'll finish that shortly because Jamie's got an animal with a heartbeat.
Well, here goes the bush baby that hopped right across in front of the road. Let me try and get you another. Oh, no, wait, there it goes. Oh no, come back. Don't go. Don't go. No, it's gone. Oh no. That was quite distressing. Shame, it was so cute. It was sitting right in the middle of the road. I love watching them when they're on the ground, bouncing across. So there was a lesser bush baby, or a lesser galago. They unfortunately very seldom stay still for very long. I have absolutely no idea where it went. Oh well, Brian. We'll get another bush baby. Where'd it go? No, I think he's gone further into the bush. All right, well, let us continue on, and while we do, we'll go back to James and Steph at the fire. Lucky them.
Well, welcome back to this. We're starting to feel a bit chilly here ourselves.
Yes.
The fire's starting to die down, and we've got the cold creeping in from the outside in, as you can see from James. There's this great coat that he's got wound up around his shoulders. But having a look at the fire, Safari Dean, you've just asked me, is there any particular type of wood that I like to use that keeps bugs away? And of course, the first one that comes to mind is also the most common thing that's going to come to mind, and that would be slivers of tamboti. Thrown into the fire periodically produces quite an aromatic smoke, I suppose, and that keeps clouds of mosquitoes away, flies, and depending on the volume of chips that you throw into the fire, probably people as well. It can be quite toxic.
My grandfather apparently used to have one big piece of tamboti in the house, and they'd have a fire every winter in Johannesburg, because Johannesburg does get very cold during the winter time, and we don't build for the cold. We build as though we live in permanent summer, which we inescapably do not. But he had a log in his house that he would put into the fire for, say, 5 minutes every night, pull it out, and then leave it on the side. And it gives a beautiful smell to the room, but it will, of course, kill you eventually if you inhale it for too long. So you can't kind of leave it on the fire and let it infuse the room, because your whole family will be found dead the next morning. That's very macabre. I didn't mean to get quite so macabre. Now, Sarah, onto a much more cheerful topic of climate change. And I didn't quite get exactly what about climate change you want to know, but I'm going to ask Kirsten to read it through to me again. I'm hoping it's going to come through exactly now. Right, I see. Okay, you want to know if I have seen any effects, subtle or obvious, from climate change. Stefan, I'm going to hand this to you, and then I'll give my impressions. What do you think?
I'm unfortunately not the best person to ask about this, because I studied geology at university, and a geologist's time frame spans millions of years. And I'm going to say that we are exactly where we need to be. I'd say the last couple of 100,000 years has been fairly calm in terms of massive climatic changes. We've had a few small ice ages, there's been a few warm spells, but generally speaking, it's actually been quite a pleasant place to be on Earth for the last 2 million years or so. So I would say that yes, I mean, we're seeing a drought right now, but in 2012 this place was underwater, 2000 this place was underwater, 2009 we were dry again, 1994 we were incredibly dry, 96 we were wet, so you know, for me it's just the way things are. It needs to be.
For me, I think that we are very quick to attribute any kind of anomaly in the weather pattern to some kind of anthropomorphic climate change, or anthropogenic climate change, and I think that that's a mistake. Do I think that the world is heating up because of human beings? Yes, I do. I do believe that. I think it's pretty much irrefutable, and anybody who says otherwise is either not au fait with the facts or away with the fairies. But is it obvious? Can we actually see it here? And I don't think that we can. I think that especially, geological time is a really good way of looking at it, because, I mean, the Earth's been around, 3.5 billion years, correct?
Yeah,
and
4.3, I think.
Yeah, 4.3 billion years. And during that time, remember, human beings have only been around on Earth for about 200,000 years, and we've only sort of had cities and that sort of thing for the last 10,000 years or so, plus minus. And so in terms of geological time, that's nothing. Now, this heating of the Earth that's going on as a result of anthropogenic effects since the Industrial Revolution has happened over the last 150 to 200 years, which is, I mean, it's such a minute piece of time that for us to be looking around and attributing things to climate change, given the scale of time that the Earth's been around, I think is quite difficult. I've no doubt that if we were studying very specific things that we knew were really affected, the barrier reef is a very good example.
Yeah.
We think that the Great Barrier Reef is probably dying off because of heating oceans, and we think the oceans are heating probably because of anthropogenic climate change.
Except that
Yeah?
I honestly think that the movement towards a more global approach to how we consume stuff is the right way to go. And the way that we're consuming and the way that we're producing greenhouse gas and all the other toxins that we produce is absolutely a good topic to talk about. But you take instantaneous changes to the Earth's climate. You've got massive volcanic eruptions that have done that, meteor strikes, all of these massive earthquakes. They'll all have intense climatic changes at a global scale. And so I don't really think that we can escape what we're doing. I don't think it's uncommon or unusual. I do think, though, that we have to ask the questions, how are we adding to this, and what can we do to stop it? You know, even if we're not having on a global scale in geological time having that much of an effect, but we do have to ask questions about how fast we are burning through resources. That for me is the question.
So, I mean, we can chat more about that a bit later, but let's just quickly, we've got an actual animal to show you, and Jamie's got that now.
Here we go. We've still got our bird. Oh, no, we don't. No, we definitely don't. Well, we're going to try. Here we go. Bird is gone. There was a bird there. So picture something with feathers and wings and 2 legs with quite round knees. And that was the bird that was there. A nocturnal bird species that is now flying off, so definitely we're not going to have a chance to see. I think it might have settled over there. Let's go and investigate. It's called a dikop. Oh, that's the old name, the name that I grew up knowing about. A dikop, or a thickney, and in this case it is a spotted thickney, and responsible for a lot of the sort of whistling chirps that you hear whilst you're watching the Djuma Dam or the Arathusa Dam camera at night. And particularly, of course, in those areas, the water thickney is what is responsible for that. Unfortunately, though, he or she has well and truly disappeared. Much like our bush baby, unfortunately, Brian, luck is not on our side. We have to change this. And a good morning to Joey in Australia. Aha! Joey, hold on one moment. Oh no, that's a scrub hare, never mind. Thought it was our thickney, but it's a scrub hare. Joey would like to know about the most endangered bird species that we have on Djuma. So Joey, some of the most endangered, strangely enough, are actually the vulture species. Sorry, that scrub hare has... the thickney was hiding next to the scrub hare. Live safaris with things that can fly away from you. So back to Joey's endangered bird species. Vultures are some of the most endangered out here. So vultures throughout Africa, but particularly in this area, face a very serious problem in terms of either carcasses being poisoned or lack of understanding as to how it was they were able to find a carcass. It was almost like they were predicting where an animal was going to die, and this led to this very peculiar belief that if you use a vulture in traditional medicine, it will give you the ability to see into the future. So they're very highly valued as a good luck trinket. And most of the raptors out here will face a threat in some way due to habitat loss, encroachment of power lines, and so on. The secretary birds that you see on Arathusa or Djuma or Cheetah Plains are also quite threatened just in terms of, there's actually been a shocking decline in their nesting for some strange and not fully understood reason. It seems as though they are not nesting in their usual spots or as frequently as they might normally. It's generally the larger bird species that are the most at risk, and then every now and again you get a surprise visitor. So a sort of a once or a twice off sighting, like the one of the Egyptian vulture, which are not really, they're not so much endangered as just particularly rare in this area. Eagles of a rose eagle here. They're much more cliff-based birds. I'm trying to think if there are any others. Maybe some of the stork species might also run similar risks to the larger birds of prey. And then the marabou storks. Marabou storks are particularly endangered. First of all, due to a drop in the number of carcasses that they can scavenge, but also because they were just seen as ugly pests. And I mean, a marabou stork, it kind of has a face that only a really affectionate mother could love. They're not the prettiest of birds, but they are very, very important. And in their own way, they're quite majestic. And please forgive me, Brent and myself have been planning our routes so that we divide ourselves equally. Let's just find out where he is. Standing by. Ooh, finger's too cold. Brent, I've just come along Pangolin Track. I think I'm going to make my way along towards Triple M. What's your plan? Copy. I asked Brent what his plans were. He said to stay on the crests. And what that means is he's as cold as we are, Brian. Him and VM are as cold as we are. So the warmest patches, which was actually Brian and myself's plan, we were going to go find ourselves a nice crest and stop there for a while. We haven't quite reached that point. But the drainage lines, so the river systems and the dips, are particularly chilly this morning. Woof. Okay, well, Brian, I'm not going to torture us both by taking us through Philemon's Dip, the place that VM claims is the coldest on Djuma. But I think the Mawati gives it a pretty close run for its money. The Mawati drainage earlier was freezing. Well, let us see, on the subject of Brent and VM and crests, let's see if Brent has managed to find a warmer spot than we have.
So, of course, VM and myself are geniuses. Firstly, we're staying on the high ground, which means it's about 3 degrees warmer than down at the bottom. And we've come up to this high spot to listen for lions. And as we did it, a male lion has roared, probably no more than 100 meters from us. But unfortunately, he's in Buffalo's Hook. But this is the area, I'm pretty sure it's the same one Jamie had tracks for earlier. Now, if he's roaring, he's on the move, and I'm hoping he's going to be on the move towards us. Just there, that's so frustrating. I'm hoping he walks down this road right at us. But what we're going to do in the meantime is I think we'll check down towards Sydney's and then come back and wait here to see if he roars again. It's so close. Let me just let Jamie know. Jamie. So of course Jamie and I are the only two vehicles who are out at the moment. Jamie, I just had that Wanuna Ngala calling probably 100 meters from the Buffalo's Hook sign to the north. I'm going to hang around in this area and hopefully he comes southwest.
Copy, awesome. We can but hope.
Yeah. As Jamie says, we can but hope. Now, I'm hoping there might be some other lions around. Maybe they've headed towards Sydney's waterhole for a drink. And maybe our little side-striped jackal friends might be about. It's so tantalizingly close, that lion. I'm feeling lucky. Liam, are you feeling lucky? I think the lion's going to come visit us. Oh, I love that sound. It makes me forget about the cold and get excited. Now, for me to have heard that over this engine, that's how close he was. This is a very loud diesel car, so it sounds somewhat like a tractor. I think we found lots of Impala. Okay, lights off. Thought I saw what possibly might have been a jackal beyond them. Scampering away. Around here. What is that there? No, that's a Steenbok. But this area seems to be a very busy line here at the moment around Buffalo Cut Line, Sydney Waterhole. Hopefully it continues to be so, and hopefully this morning, lion who's wandering in the pre-dawn a little bit to the south and west. So while we keep checking for lions, let's go see how warm.
Well, mercifully, everybody, the eastern horizon is beginning to actually light up, which means that today has now begun. And we've just been listening to the same lions that I think Brent could hear. They've stopped now, and they do seem to be, unfortunately, off Djuma at the moment. So, nice question from Mike there about human populations and Kruger National Park. I think specifically around resources in the year 2050. There seems to be some big resource year that year. And Steph, you had some opinions on that.
I've only heard a few sketchy reports coming from the Kruger National Park about how they are aiming towards 2050 and a more incorporated park. So at the moment, you have this conservation structure which is dominant in the province. I mean, it creates a massive amount of employment. It creates a massive amount of scientific investigation or interest, and then obviously tourism as well, worldwide. But it has very little relevance apart from money generated by income to the populations that are right on the outskirts and the borders of the park. And that is going to change by 2050. So if I were to say what significant steps or changes we're going to see by 2050, it would be the fact that local communities are going to have a more beneficial role to play in the park, and we'll see more direct benefits from the park and the way that the Kruger National Park is structured. At the moment, like I said, it's very limited to income derived from employment, and that's about it. There's nothing else, and we will see a much broader shift of focus onto populations next to the park. So that's about it from what I know, at least anyway, of what's happening.
So, I mean, just to give you an idea, I mean, there are 4.5 million people living on the borders of the Kruger National Park. On the western borders in Mozambique, there are even more. And, you know, in many of the great parks of East Africa, there are no fences around the parks. And, I mean, that there's a kind of buffer zone between where, I guess, village proper starts and then where park proper starts. And so you have this buffer or intermediary zone where wildlife and cattle, for example, live in, well, relative harmony.
Limited harvesting.
Yeah, and there's limited harvesting of plants and that sort of thing. So I think that would ideally be the kind of situation that we want to create here. But mostly, there's no benefit, or if people cannot see a benefit to having the park here, then eventually, you know, the poverty around the wildlife areas of Africa is going to overwhelm the parks. But I think certainly my research has indicated that people out here overwhelmingly do see a benefit to the park. They do see it as a place that is highly important both to conservation and to employment and to income derivation, and they would like to be more active stakeholders and shareholders in that sort of thing.
Must be.
Yeah, and so I think that's probably where the park will go from there. Now, I have got my camera in my hand here, of course, and that is because I am learning to take pictures, and I take fairly bad pictures. Jean-Andre has been giving me some pointers, basically as brutally, honestly as well. I've been known to give feedback to people about various things, and so I'm feeling very dejected and sad right now because some of my pictures, he said, were... I said, what did you think of this picture, Jean-Andre? And he said, I think you should delete it. That was the sole compliment that he had about my picture that I took of everyone here at the fire. I'm going to try again, and while I do that, let's go to Jamie.
Well, I hear that Brent has been listening to the lion that we were attempting to track this morning along Buffels Hook Cut Line just to the north of our Traverse area. Now I'm taking a long shot and hoping that maybe the lions that Brent heard calling to the south might be on their way to join up with their buddy, or that the Birmingham boys are going to start moving west in response to the presence of the Matimbas. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drive across to our western boundary now. We've done a very thorough boundary check this morning and go and investigate and see if they haven't been attracted or whether or not they've realized that the Matimba males have sort of snuck in to the boundary of their territory and just been hiding there. So 2 days ago they were on a buffalo kill in the drainage line close to the Arathusa Lodge. That buffalo kill was then usurped by the Tsalala Pride. And James and Brian had the most extraordinary sighting. It was with you, wasn't it, Brian? Yeah. The most incredible sighting of an elephant charging the lions yesterday. Let's go and investigate, since the western edge of Djuma seems to be happening an interesting play of different dynamics. Let's go over to Brent, who's got one of our other little canid species.
So we have found our little jackal friends out at Sandy Patch. There we go. Hello, little side striped. And they are feeling the cold this morning, curled up in little balls. They're probably going to become a little bit more dusk and dawn. And there's the other. Oh, there's the lion again. So I'm just going to keep quiet. So that lion's on the move. Sounds like he's heading slightly more northwest, which is not great for us. Right. And I know one of James Richards' favourite little creatures is the jackal, and said seeing a jackal in the dawn would be great. I'm just keeping quiet. I'm trying to listen to see if that male lion gets an answer from another lion. Nothing yet. So I was saying jackal, the side-striped jackal are quite crepuscular, and what that means is they are most active at dusk and dawn, so it's still a little bit early for them. They should be waking up in probably another 45 minutes to an hour, and they might even just laze about in the sun and warm up before they start moving. in this area, they've been feeding a lot off the guarri bushes. Oh, we got spider webs everywhere this morning. So the little fruit of the guarri, very sweet, very nice fruit. And I've actually seen them feeding off it quite a lot. And it's the same as what the baboons are moving through these areas after. So competing with the jackal for the fruit of the guarri bush. Now, it sounds like that lion might move and come out around Sydney's waterhole. So, evil Pegasaurus. Now, that is an interesting handle. Would like to know, what is the general sleeping routine for the lions? Now, the lions sleep on average for about 20 out of 24 hours. And they are active in bouts. So I heard them before I went to bed, around 9:30, making a big ruckus calling. And then they went to sleep for a while. Now, they might sleep for an hour, they might sleep for 20 minutes before moving, but generally this is a really good time to catch them moving. Oh, there he is, roaring again. That's not good for us, I'm afraid. Sounds like he is heading further north. So that line is sort of over there, and it sounds like he's going that way, sort of northwestish. But there are 4 of them, so there could be another one about. It definitely sounds like a male. Now, a lot of people say they can tell the difference between a male and female lion. Oh, I think we probably get it wrong half the time, but to me it sounds that few octaves deeper, but we are quite close. At a distance, male and female sound exactly the same to 99% of people out there, I would say. Now, I'm going to go back up onto the high ground where he is calling from. Hopefully we'll get a response from another lion that we can follow. So while we hang around this northwestern corner of Djuma, let's go see what Jamie's up to down in the southwest.
Down south, but slowly making our way north along the western boundary, just to see whether or not that male lion is all on his own, or if perhaps his buddies are on the way to come and join him. Ooh, that was a very cold dip. That was a very, very cold dip. So far, no sign of any tracks crossing north, but that doesn't mean that they're not on their way. We did bump into a herd of elephants, and unfortunately it's just that little bit too dark for us to sit and watch them and observe them. But I did spend a moment just sitting with the engine off, listening to them rustling around us, gently having their very peaceful breakfast. Earlier I was just saying to Brian that it would be so nice if we knew where the hyena den was right now, because we could go and sit there at this point and just wait for it to get light and wait for the cubs and the adults to start emerging from their shelter and possibly even looking for some sun to bask in, which I know I'm going to be doing very soon, so once the sun breaks over the horizon. And it seems as though, for those of you who have missed the updates, it does look as though our hyenas have very sadly moved their den onto, we think, either Simbambili or Buffelshoek. We don't know exactly where they've gone. But they do not seem to be on Djuma anymore. That's okay though, it doesn't mean that they're gone forever, and they will certainly be back at some point. Djuma is the heart of that clan's territory. And there's a good chance that they will be back once again. Elena, watching in California while we're driving along talking about nocturnal beasties, you were wondering about how many different species of bats there are in South Africa. Off the top of my head, I can't give you the exact number, but I can tell you... Oh, sorry, Dacre. Sleeping Dacre. Made me think it was a white-tailed mongoose or something. I can tell you that there are lots. And we've got two big groups. We've got the Microcoroptera and the Megacoroptera, which is the division between insect-eating and fruit-eating bats. And between those two sort of suborders, we've probably got well over 50 or close to 50 species. There's lots and lots of different, from the fruit bats, slit-nosed bats, Egyptian bats. We've got a whole wide range. What are they called? Hog-nosed bats as well. We actually had an encounter with one the other evening when it flew into our bedroom and knocked itself out on the fan. Shame, poor little thing. Obviously the fan is particularly disruptive to the Microcoroptera, which are the insect-eating bats that rely on echolocation to navigate. And this was obviously completely confounded by the spinning of the fan and got hit on the head and fell down on the floor, and both Brent and myself were convinced that this poor little thing had died because it went completely dead still. So we went and we had a look at it, and it turned out to be, I think it was a common slit-nosed bat. And it lay still, and as Brent went to pick it up to take it outside, this thing erupted into flight, nearly bashed him on the nose as it flew away, and then promptly managed to navigate its way out of the window, this time managing to successfully negotiate with the fan and fly around it rather than into it. Lots of different species. We do see them on the live drives every now and again, fluttering about. Thank goodness we've got such incredibly talented cameramen, because they're skilled enough to catch them in mid-flight. Most of the time, however, we don't get to see where they roost during the day. Where I used to live, which was an old farmhouse, we would see them all the time. They used to live in the roof of the house and flutter in and out every evening and every morning, and they'd come and they'd sit. My record was 8 of them at one point, watching me as I went to the bathroom, which is always a strange sensation, because although their navigational skills are incredible, they're very, very good at not flying into things. Every now and again they make a mistake, just like human beings. Every now and again we stub our toes or whatever else we happen to do, or knock our knees, and they do occasionally fly accidentally into your head, which has happened to me once or twice, not often, but once or twice. You've got to be careful with bats and in terms of touching them, because they are serious vectors of disease. They're carriers of rabies. They generally don't suffer the symptoms, but they can carry it in a passive manner. And if you do get bitten, it's very, very important that you have that seen to straight away. Although, that being said, I did read an article recently on bats that suggested that they might not, that the rabies virus might not actually be as common as initially suspected in bat populations, and that it might be more the jackals and the mongoose families that carry it and transmit it on to other wild animals. Okay, we're heading for the crest, Brian, as the sun starts to rise. Whoop! Times have changed. Oh no, sorry, Brian. There is a lioness at the Djuma Dam. It's our lioness. I'm sure it's the one that's... Okay, we switch out of low range for this. I'm sure it's the one... I'm sure that it is the one that has the cubs. I'm not sure exactly where Brent is. I'm probably about 5 minutes away, give or take. Sorry, everybody. We're going to have to do a bit of a Ferrari safari. Brian, please don't get hypothermia. Brian says you'll try. The reason I'm so excited is that that lioness, I think, is the one that is denning in that drainage line. So she's got cubs, and I really want to go see if we can see suckle marks. I think it's pretty much an even toss-up between which of us is closer, Brent or myself. We're probably equidistant. So while we race across there, let's go back to James around his nice warm fire.
Hello everybody. Again, you can see the day has kind of broken behind us, which is very nice. There's a bit of grey light filtering through the clearings behind us. The birds have begun calling. What is that swizzling call there?
White-barred scrub robin. The go-to bird when...
There is a swizzling call behind us, which may or may not belong to white-browed scrub robin. The francolins have started yelling. The baboons, there's one coming right out. I forgot, John, I can't actually move that camera. Baboons coming out of the trees now. One of them jumped 3 meters onto the ground because it saw Eugene and got a very big fright. Anyway, he's disappeared off into the dawn light, not Eugene, the baboon. And it's all rather pleasant out here now, I must say, very pleasant by our fire. Connor has brought us a kettle. We're making some coffee. So Brent and Jamie are freezing on their own with VM and Brian. Now, Betty, you had a lovely question about water recycling in the Sabi Sands. Does it happen? Betty, it does to a certain extent and it doesn't to some extent. So, I mean, the water that we get comes out of the ground and eventually, yes, it does fetch back up in the ground. Do we have an active recycling program? In all honesty, we don't. But because we live in a camp that's relatively small and we don't have baths and that sort of thing, we've got showers that are normally cold, and so we don't use a lot of water when we're having a shower. They're not normally cold at all. The water does filter back into the ground. And so I suppose that is a form of recycling. It is certainly something that many of the lodges down on the Sand River are working at, because in order to deliver a 5-star experience and to charge the prices that they do, and they do need to charge those prices in order to maintain this area, you can't really say to somebody, well, you know, you can only have a bath once while you're here, because people will go somewhere else. And so they're expecting a kind of, I guess, Hilton-esque hospitality experience in the context of the bush. And so many of them are working on solutions of recycling water, but water usage out here in the tourism areas certainly is something that is definitely worth consideration and that people do a lot of work on. Now, Stefan, I want to show you my picture. Would you like to see my picture?
I would like to see your picture.
And then Legendre will show you all my picture, everyone. There it is. Oh, wait, no, that's off Gendre. We don't want that one. There, that's artistic.
It is.
I'm so artistic.
I think you got the composition just right there.
Do you?
The
Thank
colours
you.
are fantastic, rich,
Thank you.
saturated.
Thank you very much.
We're trying to teach Gendre how to give positive reinforcement for...
What do you think, Gendre? Best photo ever. Is that what you said? Wildlife photographer of the year. That, of course, is a slight insult because he's calling us all wildlife, but thank you, Gendre, that's not a bad compliment from you. And Jenny, you want to know about renewable energy in the Sabi Sands. We use a little bit of renewable energy, don't we?
I think it's getting there. I know of 2 projects, one of a reserve just slightly to our south that has taken their entire staff village onto renewable energy, solar panels. And as far as I understand, a good portion of their room's electricity is generated by solar and stored on batteries. And I know that the owner of this particular reserve on an adjacent farm that he has is working on to a zero electricity usage from the grid model by next year or the year after, where the electricity that he uses to farm with will be completely offset by the electricity generated by solar panels on his farm. And he gave me a very interesting statistic the other day. He said that if 800 farmers did what he did, they wouldn't have had to build the Medupi power station.
He was.
How's that?
Incredible.
And it's free land. It's
unbelievable.
on land that was reclaimed farmland. So it would take the next 30, 40 years or whatever to get back to a natural state. And he just decided to put up some solar panels there. Which
I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think a lot of, we've got solar panels here running the Gowrie repeater, for example. That's why when it goes cloudy, sometimes the Gowrie repeater needs a little bit of a boost, kick in the pants, which Eugene gives it every so often. Tony, a nice question from you. How do we get the local people involved in conservation? I think it comes down to almost one simple word, and that's awareness. It's not education so much as awareness. As people need to understand and need to derive some kind of benefit from this. They need to be brought into discussing how they could be deriving benefits from the rural areas. And I mean, look, I've painted possibly a slightly negative picture of that articulation between local people and wildlife. But, you know, let's take the Sabi Sands. There are probably 2,000 jobs within the Sabi Sands. That's local people. Each of those people is supporting between 6 and 8 people, sometimes up to 10. And so if you look at it like that, the Sabi Sands is supporting 15,000 people. But there are obviously a lot more. And there is a 60% unemployment rate in many of the villages out here. And so the conversation will continue. And I do think that there has to be a lot more dialogue, and I do think that there has to be a lot more kind of awareness, especially in the younger kids. They need to grow up with the knowledge. You know, a lot of those kids out there think that there are tigers in this reserve. They've never seen an elephant or a lion or a buffalo, and certainly there are efforts afoot to change that, but I think those could certainly be stepped up a bit. So, Tony, that's a very nice question there.
I once heard a nice statement that said conservation is a first world luxury. And it absolutely is. Even in South Africa, where the difference between haves and have-nots is so big, we grew up as haves, and we have this notion of conservation and this need and this want and this love and appreciation for conservation. But the have-nots don't. They see conservation areas as competition for resources, for grazing. They see it as a threat. Animals escape the reserves and eat their livelihood and, you know, threaten their lives and break their homes or whatever. And it brings it into very stark focus, that statement.
And I mean, if we go back to that little example of the toaster or the kettle that we boil, you know, I remember driving through, as a kid, driving through rural villages on the way to game reserves and seeing litter everywhere and feeling, you know, how can people do this? And being totally unaware that every time I put the kettle on, of course, however, just because the carbon that I'm producing is invisible, doesn't make it any less littering. And so that's, you know, a good thing to think about. Jamie is knocking about here somewhere. I think she might have something interesting to tell you.
Knocking about, actually, not far away from where James is now. We're making our way towards the dam. I want to investigate exactly what it is that has scared that lioness or that has attracted her attention. So that's where Brian and myself are shivering our way to. It's now a question of whether we will freeze or get to the lioness in time. I'm just investigating something. I thought I saw a baboon in Yuri's garden, but I think that might just have been my imagination. Although James did say that he could hear baboons calling this morning. So this is most likely the lioness that is, we think that she's denning around the drainage line just to the east of the dam. Now the problem is here, if there are guests in the lodge, we cannot go across and right in front of it. So I'll have to do a roundabout approach to this. I think Brent is approaching from the north. I've come through from the south. Let's just see if we can do this without disturbing anyone. We're still not entirely sure if there are guests at Voyatella at the moment or not. We're just going to go around slowly. I think it looks very quiet. Looks like all of the lights are off there. Yeah. Hello, buffalo. Standing by. Copy. Here we go, some buffalo bulls all clumped together. One lioness is most definitely not a threat to these leviathans of the buffalo world. They are absolutely enormous. Definitely not threatened by her. There's no way that on her own she could hunt a fully grown buffalo bull. Lots of them all together though, clustered for safety. Right, let's go find this lioness. Still not 100% sure that the lodge is empty. Brent's approaching from the north, I'm approaching from the south. And he's suggested checking around twin dams since she's gone into the drainage line itself. We suspect she's, oh my goodness. Whew. We suspect that she is denning somewhere in the thick bushes in the drainage line to the southeast of the dam. Although James thinks otherwise. He thinks that she's on the north, although she could just have moved ever so slightly. I don't see any lights on at the lodge. I think we're free of guests. They would be up by now. And let's just carry on a little bit further down. I'll go south down Twin Dams. Brent's got that side covered. Let us keep our eyes peeled for this lioness. Well, at least we have an explanation as to why she ran. I think there's a good chance that a buffalo bull decided that it didn't appreciate the pleasure of her company this early in the morning and decided to send her packing. Not unusual for buffalo to chase, particularly lionesses, and particularly a lioness on her own. And while we search carefully, it seems as though I was not mistaken and that there are baboons around. Let's head across into the fireplace.
Well, we're not quite in the fireplace. You can see a few of the baboons there, and they are just crossing over the clearings. They've just come out of the trees, the tall trees around about the house over there, around the final control. They've been up in the fever trees, which of course are very thorny, and you can hear them going, "Bow!" That's what they're doing, very loudly. And some of them are engaged in some rather nefarious activities the other side of the clearing there, showing their amorous intentions for each other, which is quite amusing. And now we can't see them anymore, I'm afraid. And Gendry, I'm afraid, is immobile from where he is now, aren't you, Gendry? He's nodding. He can't even talk anymore. It's wonderful. You can insult him at will and he can't do anything. The coffee is complete. It's not bad. One must always drink coffee out of a tin mug when one is in the wild, and so that's what I'm doing here. Now, it's really good to have the baboons back with us because they are truly entertaining, and of course they're entertaining and disturbing because many of their behaviors are so similar to human behaviors, and I always think that they're a little bit like a prison gang. And if you watch them knocking about the place and you watch the way they raid different areas, it's like watching a prison gang at work. Thankfully, they haven't come raiding towards the fire. I'd have been very upset if they'd decided they wanted to have some of our coffee. Now, still at the fireside, of course, is Mr. Stefan Winterboer. Stefan, are you pleased that the baboons have returned?
Yeah, I suppose it's a double-edged sword that I am, because it's quite nice seeing baboons on drive and showing them to you, of course, and they do get up to some fantastic antics. But that it almost always evolves into a camp raiding sort of reign of terror that they have, and it becomes a sort of battle of wills against how you outsmart baboons and, you know, how they outsmart you, which is 99% of the time. So yeah, it comes with a bit of a bittersweet feeling, I suppose, yeah.
Judy H., you're asking about compost. We've talked a lot about, I suppose, appropriately for World Environment Day, we've spoken a lot about water recycling and renewable power, and you want to know about composting. Do we compost things? I think the camp does compost the wet waste. I'm not sure exactly where it goes. We don't grow anything here, you see, so, I mean, for us to be using it in a garden, for example, we have small gardens now in the camp, thanks to old Sam, who's unfortunately left us, and there is a bit of compost on those. But no, we don't particularly compost. Out in the villages, though, absolutely, people do use their wet waste, and many of our vegetables come from a local village farm. And this is the kind of, to me, this is where sustainability really meets the road, if you like. The rubber meets the road. That is the worst mixed metaphor I've ever used in my life. Anyway, local produce, stuff grown locally by local people on local land, using local things like local compost and cow dung and that sort of stuff. That is where we're going to make a sustainable difference to the people out here.
Yeah.
When there is sufficient supply for us to have the lodges out here and all of the tourists supplied with high quality, sort of Michelin star quality ingredients grown in the local area from things like composting and sort of sustainable use of land out here. That's where we're really going to kind of make a big difference.
And I know there's been a good few projects using kitchens, wet waste, or the scrapings from kitchens and leftovers from food that has passed its sort of hotel standard use-by date in piggeries up and down the Kruger National Park. So that's been going on for quite a few years. I know there's quite a lot of piggeries, not large scale or anything, but definitely helping local farmers utilize waste here.
Yeah. And you know, it's smaller. It's those smaller projects that are going to make a difference. It's not these kind of industrial-sized things where you have an administration-heavy conglomerate where most of the money, it's got to be enormous for anybody to derive some kind of an income from it. It's those small piggeries that create a relationship, say, with Juma or with a lodge somewhere else where they become the sole pork supplier, for example, and then there's a local chicken supplier that does the same sort of thing, and you have free-range chickens coming in. That's a really kind of sustainable way, I think, for this area to move forward. And then, Jen, you want to know about thatching. Do people get the opportunity to fetch thatch? They do in the Kruger, not so much on this reserve because the landscape is wrong for it. There isn't much thatching grass on the granite-derived soils. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I do know of some thatching grass thickets on open areas where too much burning has taken place, but there's not lots. You know? There's not a lot of thatching grass here.
Yeah. But I do know that in some parts of Kruger, certainly people are allowed to come in and fetch thatching grass. On the gabbro-derived soils, probably, it's a different geology to what we're sitting on now, and then you do get that long kind of thatching grass growing there. But remember, to harvest thatching grass in amongst the lions and the elephants and the buffalo, well, it takes a certain amount of security detail to make that a safe thing. And in fact, a few years ago, there was a horrible tragedy with people collecting thatching grass totally legally. They were doing it legally, and a fire whipped through the area. And I think it caught 2 or 3 people. They were ringed in and they couldn't escape, and so that was a real tragedy. It's not, a lot of people, if you said to them, would you like to come into the reserve to fetch some thatching grass, they'd say, are you out of your mind? I'd far rather go down the road to the hardware store, spend a little bit of money and buy some corrugated iron, because it's actually less effort, it lasts longer, and, well, your chances of you being ironed by something very large and hairy are that much smaller. So, yeah, in terms of natural building products, not so much. Medicine, though, would be a big thing that people can come and collect.
I mean, I'd like to add at this point that there's a lot of very good institutionalized endeavors to try and unlock how people can sustainably utilize this environment. Excuse me. Everything from cultivating plants and agriculture to collecting bush medicine and cultivating bush medicine to innovative business strategies. I'm just thinking in my mind now, up and down the Kruger National Park, people are really taking it seriously. They're really taking this drive towards incorporating local people into these reserves. They almost universally accept the fact that the sustainability of tourism in this area, the sustainability of these wilderness areas is tied inextricably to the communities on the outskirts here. And there's a lot of good initiatives. So just to reassure you all, from an institutional level, governmental level, all the way down to business owner level at this side, and even individuals, are making a huge difference and a huge impact. It's just, lack of awareness of these projects is probably our downfall rather than it not happening.
Yeah. And I think one of the really nice examples would be Michael Grover, who's the general manager of Juma's husband, and he's an ecologist, highly progressive ecologist, and he does a huge amount of work in the communities outside here with cattle grazing. And we've heard us mention quite a lot about how, or certainly me, how the buffalo look pretty good at the moment, but the cattle outside look like they're on their last legs in many respects. And that, in many respects, is a disaster, because much of the wealth that local people have, the meager wealth that they have, is tied up in livestock.
Yep.
And there are ways, Mike's engaging with them in trying to manage the rangelands on which those cattle graze more effectively, so that the cattle, without reducing their numbers, will survive more sustainably.
Yeah.
So there are definitely projects afoot that are very important. Let's head across to Brent, find out. We definitely heard some lions. Maybe he's got an update on them.
There was that Nkahuma lioness at the pan moments ago, and we're pretty sure she's the one who's got cubs on Juma somewhere and in one of these little river systems. So unfortunately we weren't quick enough to get to the pan before she disappeared, but Jamie and I are both in the area circling now, and hopefully we are going to find her. And wouldn't it be incredible if we found those little baby lion cubs? Well, thanks for the update, Morning Glory, who says it was a hippo who chased the lioness off. So sad we lost her. Me too. And I know VM is as well, and I'm sure Jamie and Brian feel the same. Hopefully we will be able to catch her again shortly. And it's got colder, if you can believe it. I reckon, especially here where we are, right down next to the river systems, it must be at least 48, or at most 48, 50, so around 9 degrees Celsius. But if we can find that lioness, it's all worth the chill. It's definitely got colder. What do you think, Liam? Yeah. Liam, it's freezing. So I know James has been chatting about some conservation issues this morning and global issues, and one of them is global warming. And VM often has some of the best one-liners that ever happen out here. And when we got the update from Final Control that James was chatting about global warming, VM's response is, well, we could use some global warming about now. And as it gets colder, I almost tend to agree with him. Come on, kitty cat. Now, if she didn't get a good drink and that hippo chased her off, she might go back later on, so keep an eye out on that damn cam. Thanks very much, Morning Glory, who says she has faith in us that we will find the lioness. I hope you're right. Now, my hot water bottle's even getting a little bit chilly. Well, it's still lukewarm, I suppose it could be described as. How's your hot water bottle, VM? VM says he's going to start drinking out of his hot water bottle soon, it's so cold. I must say I'm a little bit envious of that fire at the moment. Melissa says it seemed like she was calling her cubs and then she left. Melissa, was she doing a sort of, or was it a, ow, ow? So lioness have a couple of different calls. If she was doing a low sort of, it might have been a contact call for the other adults, but if there was that interspersed with a ow, ow, then she was definitely calling cubs. So we've suspected she's got her cubs somewhere in this low-lying area ahead of us. And so Jamie's checking closer around the waterhole. We've done a wider loop, and we're going to head back into that area now. There we go. Lucy in South Bend, Indiana, says the lioness didn't even get anything to drink, so it is possible she might try go back there a little later. So our eyes are now peeled. Maybe she didn't move too far. Okay, so this is the little river system. We suspect, we're not sure, that she might be keeping those cubs in. Shouldn't she check carefully that maybe she hasn't moved back up here? Come on, madam. Where are you in Kahuma? Go away bird alarm calling, but they do alarm call at birds as well, but it is the right area. Thanks, a curious one says it was not a cub call, it was a contact call, so that now I'm going to suffer, but I shall suffer for the chance of a lion. Off with the hot water bottle, off with the leg blankie, and I'm going to try stand and look down into the river system. So while we hopefully get a chance at finding this lioness, let's go see how the two toasty boys next to the fire are.
He really just can't let it go, can he? He's like a dog with a very manky bone, or a hyena with a bone. Oh, it's so hot by the fire, I'm freezing here, risking my life tracking lions, blah, blah, fish paste. Now, our Beard, a very nice question from you about what are the best developments that we know of in the Kruger National Park over the last few years that have made a conservation contribution. Steph, you've got an idea.
The Kruger National Park has sort of remodeled itself recently, and I think contrary to the general belief of the people that were utilizing the park for their own benefit, and everyone expected this downfall and collapse when the Kruger National Park reshuffled its management, probably around about 1998, 1999. I've only seen good things come of it. We've had the park start to utilize more of its surface area, which of course has created more employment opportunities. It's creating new opportunities for business or traditional business to be restructured, and so more money is going to communities on the outskirts, more focused to specific communities or specific projects. And I would just have to say that the rest camps have all been renovated. The redistribution of positions is now finally in its final phases, and so we're getting people actually moving forward. I don't know. This may be a bit controversial with me saying it, but I believe totally that the Kruger National Park is a better place today than what it was 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Steph, of course, is being very politically correct, and I am inescapably not politically correct. And basically, I mean, before 1994, the advent of the democratic era of South Africa, the Kruger National Park was kind of a bastion of I don't know, it was a very white place. It was a pale white place, and it was a bastion for sort of white conservation efforts, where there very much was a fences and fortress conservation approach, where if you came across the fence, you were in big trouble, and there was no engagement with the people living outside. And as with all changes in political order throughout the world, any government institution, which is what the South African National Parks is, saw a massive change in management, as Steph says. And quite apart from the doomsdayers saying that, well, you know, these people don't know how to manage land and these people don't have the experience, blah, blah. It's, as Steph says, the Kruger National Park is a more pleasant place to visit now. There are far more people visiting it of all races in South Africa, which is extremely important.
Yep.
And so more and more people, more and more South Africans are being exposed to our amazing wildlife heritage, which of course is the whole reason we do what we do. Without people being exposed to the wildlife heritage that we have, what on earth reason would they have to help us conserve it? And why would we want to conserve land and animals if we don't know about them? So that's hugely positive. And I mean, the rest camps in the old days were, I mean, really, shiversomely, just poorly designed, and the food, a level that was, well, I mean, just very disgusting. Now you can get a great meal, you can have a clean room, the rest camps are fantastic, more access for people. And of course, you were mentioning the private concessions.
So there's 7 private concessions in the park, and they were initially thought out to be a 20-year project. So Kruger National Park doesn't do anything in less than 20-year chunks to see what impact it has. And what they chose areas in the park that were accessible but very remote areas, undisturbed wilderness, and they basically auctioned off 7 of these chunks to conservation businesses or businesses with a footprint in conservation and tourism to come up with a strategy to unlock. Obviously, lodges were the key. They have a very little impact, apart from the site that they're on, they have very little impact on the footprint of the concession. And obviously generating much marketing for these areas. And another thing that they did was they invited at different levels I want to say, I've forgotten the word now to use, but in this process of unlocking this potential, for these lodges to come up, or these companies to come up with innovative ideas to incorporate the community and incorporate business and see what they can do. And they held to that. Having been part of one of these concessions before, they do a monthly audit on your promises that you made when you were in the beginning, and you held to that on a monthly basis, and on a yearly basis that's audited. I just think it's wonderful, you know. A lot of money gets pumped back into the communities, which is good. It's what's needed.
Dina, very nice question from you. You say if you come out here and you self-cater, which you can do, absolutely, can you get locally grown produce? The answer is yes, to a certain extent. But if I was to pick one project other than well, you tie it in with people here, but certainly if I was to pick one sort of nitpicking real issue that I have, it's the fact that buying starlings flying overhead, you can't buy starlings overhead, buying locally grown produce is very difficult. So, for example, if you buy a lettuce somewhere in some of the major centres around here, it's been grown here, it's driven to Johannesburg to the big market every morning, it's been bought there and then driven back again. And so that kind of thing does irk me quite a lot. And yes, there are areas you can get locally grown produce, but certainly there could be far greater efforts. And I mean, projects like Mike Grover's doing will kind of get that sort of thing to fruition. And it would be great to be able to come to a place and buy only locally grown things, locally grown eggs and chickens and meat. And
I would say it's very possible. I'd say we're probably guilty of our own, we're remarking quite negatively on the fact that we don't grow anything, or we don't utilize the majority of our stuff locally. Whereas if you came here and you really wanted to support local communities, you could trade in the villages quite easily.
Yeah,
they grow a lot of their own food, and if we really wanted to, we could actually move into the village and get tomatoes and probably, I don't know, quite a few things. Chicken, absolutely.
Eggs?
Goats.
If you wanted to eat a goat, I suppose you could get a goat. Yeah, delicious. And there was something else of vital importance I wanted to say about this. It's easier to go into a supermarket, put everything into a trolley, put it in a packet, put it in your car, and then go to wherever you're going. But yes, I think Steph's absolutely correct. You could very easily, without anything in the back of your car, come through this area between, say, Hoedspruit and the Kruger National Park gate, and if you drove into the villages, and it would be quite safe to do so, you know, and you had a bit of cash and you asked around, people would point you towards the egg farmer, towards the veggie farmer, towards the chicken farmer, and you would be able to get locally grown produce. That's actually would be quite an interesting exercise to try and do. Maybe we should do that one day. Jamie's got an update for you. She's now no doubt basking in the rising sun, taking the coldness of the morning far more on the chin than her erstwhile friend Brent is. Let's get an update from her.
A slight exaggeration. It definitely took the wind out of my sails there, because I was about to start talking about how freezing it gets just before the sun comes up, but now I have to take it on the chin, because James said I did.
Yeah, cold.
It is very cold. It's really cold. I've been trying to take it on the chin, but it has definitely, there's a strange physics involved in the fact that just before the sunrise, it gets so much colder. And the glint of the morning light is slowly touching the tops of the trees. So I'm thinking along those lines. I know that there's a ridge between here and Winterboer Road, which is where I'm going to go next to look for that lioness. So I'm thinking, if we can sort of sit on the crest there, wait for the sun to reach us. It is very cold. It's the kind of cold that burns your nostrils and your eyes, with the wind chill factor involved as well. That also really doesn't help at all. I think that this lioness might have given us the slip. And it's sad because we have the buffalo to thank for that, in my opinion. I think that they thought about chasing her and she just decided she wasn't going to hang around and have to put up with that. That being said, thank you to Siberia Zumi, who has sent through an update about where they think that she went. And that was into the little thicket, not over the dam wall, but into the little thicket around there. So we'll go and we'll triple check there, but I'm going to do a big loop first. Her tracks come out of exactly the same spot as they did the other day. So it's almost certain that she's denning in that area. We don't want to push too hard. Obviously, if we were to try and follow her in there, we would potentially scare... Well, we don't know exactly where the den is itself. We will be keeping a close eye on where we go and how we manage that situation. It is a negative lock. In other words, we can't go tracking in there. Come on, sun. We're nearly there, Brian. I see sun on this road. We're going to go and find it. Yeah. And we'll wait for the male lion to come to us. He must just come to us. My suspicion is, though, that lioness is going to try and, just speaking of the cold, it's not just us that feel it. My suspicion is that lioness is going to think about wanting to find some sun of her own. She might not want to be hanging around in the thick drainage line areas when there's sun to warm herself up. She might leave her babies to cuddle up together and go and find warmth of her own. Oh, the noticeable difference as we drive up this road. As you can see, the sudden change in temperature has placed us in an almost misty horror movie type style. Brian's just going to give it a wipe. Sudden changes in... Oh, this is wonderful. Sudden changes in temperature. Oh, okay, we're never moving. We're going to just drive slowly up and down, backwards and forwards. And Brian, on that subject, which animals respond to the early mornings the best, apart from us? A lot of the crepuscular animals start to move around in the early mornings. Actually, early mornings is best for a lot of the different animal species because it's that perfect in-between between the nocturnal and the diurnal. But things like wild dogs and cheetah are their most active at this time of the day because they know that later it's going to, particularly in summer, but winter as well, they know that later it's going to get very, very hot and uncomfortable for them. So they want to get as much potential hunting done as they can as they go along. I was just stopping to look at old lion tracks there, but it's not our lioness. Most of the animals are going to start becoming active now. The impala, the buffalo, all of those ruminant animals will be trying to find a nice sunny spot to warm up and to, for now, ruminate. They're not in a rush to start feeding. They are going to be ruminating and just enjoying the fact that they survived the night and the dark and the cold and the predators roaming around. And speaking of the temperature changes, Insomniac, good morning and welcome to our now sunrise safari. He wanted to know if all of the chameleons are gone now that it is colder. They're not gone. They are in a state of estivation, hiding up somewhere in trees or in crevices in the ground and basically slowing their metabolism down. But yes, the chances of seeing a chameleon at this time of year is very, very slim. They are particularly sensitive to cold. They are ectotherms, just as all reptiles are. But I did see a chameleon once in midwinter, and it was, the poor little thing just couldn't move. It couldn't even change color. It was so cold. Now, they do occasionally come out, but it's very seldom that they do. All right, lioness. You appear to have disappeared. It is nice to know that she's still there, and I think that pretty much confirms that she has a den site somewhere in that region. We still don't know with 100% certainty, but it seems incredibly likely if she's moving backwards and forwards from that place the whole time. Do one more loop, check around where Siberia Zumi suggested that she might be. Let's see if we can't get this Dacre on camera at the same time. There we go. Don't run, don't run. There we go. Perfect. Thank you, Brian. It's one of the antelope species that I wouldn't say we struggle to get on camera, but definitely we have to work a little bit harder to get them. Most of the time they are dashing away, and all you catch is the fleeting glimpse of a disappearing bottom. In this case, we've got a female duiker, very clear by the lack of horns. And if you look carefully as she turns her head, hello, girl. Oh, your mohawk's not very straight up, is it? It's a bit floppy. There she goes. The duiker have this incredible sort of thick, sticking up, like this bobble, but different, sort of straight patch of hair, triangular patch of hair between their ears. Meant to look intimidating in some way. And I'm not sure if you could see very clearly, but in that morning light, her preorbital glands, the glands close to her eyes, were actually clearly visible as dents in her facial structure. Okay. Bumpy, bumpy. Everybody hold on. Morning Glory has said that it's nothing like a search for a lioness first thing in the morning to warm one up and to get the blood pumping in excitement. Oh, that's an absolutely fair point, although I would say conversely, Morning Glory, there's nothing quite like the race towards a sighting to add or drop your temperature about 5 degrees as you speed along. But it certainly gets us really, really excited and interested to try and see if we can't follow up on those animals. I've just heard an update that there's at least one of the Birmingham boys that crossed through Cheetah Plains last night and is now making his way possibly to the west. So we know where 1 and 2 of the Birmingham boys are, but not the rest of them. I'm going to send you back to James and his nice warm fire so that you can warm up there, and we're going to continue the search for this lioness.
Now she's also complaining about the fact that we're at a warm fire. Yes, it is warm. Steph's taken his jersey off, as you can see. I'm still sitting in my jersey in solidarity with my mates out in the bush. Not that I want to be there with them. Now, Ravi, another wonderful question from you all the way from New York. You want to know about dung and whether it's used in burning. Well, buffalo dung, no. Elephant dung, no, because elephant dung just makes a lot of smoke, which can smell relatively pleasant depending on what the elephant's been eating. But cow dung, in local areas, people do use sometimes for fires. I haven't seen it used out here, but Steph says in grasslands or in grassland areas, the dung does tend to be used.
Not the Masai Mara, but the Serengeti definitely, and in desert areas in Namibia, the Heroros. Yeah, I think they absolutely do use it. I mean, it's a common thing in Africa to use, but I think around the world, dung is used as a cement, a flooring, additive, as a cooking. Cooking has been for thousands of years.
I remember going to visit a woman's house, well, her whole family's house, probably it must have been around 1986, and she lived on a farm, and they had nothing, these people. They really had nothing. She and her husband, and they had 5 kids, and they lived in the most perfect little situation house-wise. It had an amazing view out over the river, and it was built, the house was, of mud bricks and dung. It was covered in this cow dung, and it gave the place, you can't believe it, how beautiful the smell of this place was. And all you wanted to do was sit inside there and breathe in, because it just smelt like home for some reason, and certainly didn't smell anything like dung does when it comes out of the animal, but it really did smell delicious, and so absolutely used all over the place. I guess a bit like a peat, almost, peat fire. It won't make a big flamey fire like this one. Not very picturesque, probably quite smoky. Yeah. But I know that people from the north of Scotland have a technique for lighting peat. I believe it's almost impossible, but they do, and I think it's probably much the same with the cattle dung out here. Jamie has got a mammal to show you.
I do indeed have a mammal, and in fact, a very alert mammal. Two kudu, a mother and her calf, and they're staring intently off into the distance, but not in a panicked way. I think it's more likely that that oxpecker suddenly was irritating the little one. Yes, those birds are a bit of a pain, aren't they, baby? But they're going to be with you for the rest of your life. Fluttering about, picking away the ticks. I don't think they're alert for any reason other than they've spotted something moving in the distance, and it's probably another kudu, just given the way that the longer you sit and watch one kudu, the more kudu you find in the background. I think that's what they were looking at, just trying to make sure that there were no threats coming through towards them. Such beautiful, graceful creatures. And you can see, if you look carefully, you can actually see how puffed up they are in this cold morning air. And like a lot of the other animals, us included, they have been trying to move onto the crests to keep warm. And there you go. I was saying about if you look for one kudu, others shall appear. Big bull in the back, and he is magnificent. I think I've seen him here before. I think he's one of the biggest, not in terms necessarily of horn size, but in terms of body structure and stockiness. I think that he might be one of the largest kudu bulls I've seen out here. He's very, very bulky, standing well head and shoulders above the female. It's a nice contrast between the two of them. And then slowly wandering along behind us is the rest of the group of kudu. Coming through. A couple of young males, cautiously stepping out. Much, much smaller than that bull that is associated with the female. Oh, look at that oxpecker clinging onto its belly. That's amazing. Acrobatics. And here comes the calf. Lots and lots of them about. Oh, I think they were just looking at other kudu. You can just have a look at why in this kind of vegetation having horns can be such a hindrance as opposed to a help. Particularly a kudu's horns, which are designed more than anything to look intimidating rather than to actually be exceptionally useful. And when they do fight, those horn clashes can be very dramatic, but not really injury-inducing unless they actually manage to get tangled up together. That's purely for reproductive purposes, and most of the time just for intimidation purposes. And Joey, I'm glad that you have stuck with us this morning. Joey watching in Australia. He'd like to know how tall that kudu is compared to me. Joey, let me think of the easiest way of describing it. So if I am close to 165, 165 centimeters, maybe a bit taller. I'm not 100% sure exactly how tall I am. Around 5'7". Oh, that's beautiful. Oh boy, aren't you stunning? And his shoulder would come about up to close to my shoulder, actually. Just a little bit lower. Just a little bit lower than my shoulder. And his horns would be taller than me. So right from ground to the top of his horns, he would be taller than I am. And a great deal heavier. Look at that incredible beard / dewlap. It's absolutely gorgeous. And speaking of his bearded neck, good morning to Liz. Liz, you were wondering whether or not there are any animals that get shaggier once it gets colder. So in kind of like things like bears getting their winter coat or Arctic foxes that actually change color completely, does anything similar happen in the African bush? And the antelope's fur might be a little bit thicker, but generally it's not something that they need. They don't need to change their coat as much as animals in more extreme climates might have to. Actually quite temperate here, and although we've been moaning about the cold, and it is cold, really, I mean, it never goes very far below zero, except with the wind chill factor, or below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So our animals don't really need to grow too much of an extra coat, although I certainly wish that I could, in a way, just have a sort of a warm undercoat on. It's just no matter how many layers you put on, the cold bites its way through. Now, could you have left? We shall continue onwards in search for the last section of the sunrise safari, see if we can't find that lioness for you. Now, Daryl, you were wondering, because the kudu does look exceptionally deer-like, you were wondering if a kudu is just like a deer. And the answer is no, not really. They're basically the African equivalent of a deer. They fill a very similar ecological place in the whole setup of the ecosystem. They're a very important food source for the predators. They're a browser of the various tree species. And they're a similar size to some of the larger species of deer, something like a red deer, for example, or a fallow deer, a bit bigger. The big difference between deer and antelope, or one of the big differences, is the horn versus antler situation. So an antelope has horns, which are solid bone that grow from sort of after their first 6 months. They start to deposit bone that then grows up in that very distinctive horn structure, whether it's a kudu or an impala or a wildebeest. That gets deposited and builds up. Now, in our case, probably about half of the antelope species, the females do actually have horns as well. They will have those for the rest of their lives because it's bone. It's a solid structure that is permanent. Bit of a bumpy road, this. Whereas deer, their antlers is actually made from hardened blood vessels. Sorry about that, everybody. Just trying to get through the bumpiest part. That was the road that, during the rains, the elephants had an absolute wonderful time digging up the mud and throwing it around, and they left us with not much of a road at the end of it all. So, Daryl, yes, the horns of a deer are sheddable and made of hardened blood vessels. And speaking of our different antelope, James Richard, you were wondering about the track size of a duiker versus a steenbok, and you were wondering how similar in size they are. The answer is very, very, very similar in size. A steenbok track they're both very tiny. We're talking about possibly less than an inch in length. A steenbok track is very sharp and almost like an impala. It's like a little mini impala. Very sharp and with defined edges. A duiker track looks like a perfect symbol of an iron. An iron is in the thing that you iron clothes with. The kind of thing that they'd use for the symbol on a t-shirt label or something that says "do not iron." That's the shape of a duiker track. Very similar in length, slightly wider and slightly more heart-shaped. But tricky, that's a tricky one to tell the difference between all of those. the little antelope, and when you throw baby impala into the mix, you've got an exceptional complication. I'm pretty sure that Brent was planning on heading back towards where that male lion was calling us, so I'm trundling towards Gallagher's shortcut, but let's find out from him what his plans really are.
So that male lion called again and has headed to the north. So unfortunately, no luck there. So I haven't quite given up on this lioness yet. Just doing another very slow and careful check to the south of the dam cam. Oh, a big group of buffalo bulls there. We'll go have a look at them shortly. I'm just trying to make sure we don't miss her or miss her tracks around here. Now I've got her tracks where she came down towards the pan, but finding tracks of her leaving are proving to be a little bit more difficult.
Ja, guys. Forward junction, Kawaplum, Nyala Road, on the blocks to Shot Mons. Okay, what do you have on there?
So I'm just listening to the game.
Yes, somebody is the long form. From the middle, you can see on the east of the block. If you check
There we go. They've just found that male line almost exactly where I said to Ephraim. If you go to the Buffalo's Hook sign and you go east towards Long Pole, that's where he sounded like he was heading. So someone's just found him right there. So he's in Buffalo's Hook. We thought maybe the lioness went towards Inga's house, but no such luck. Well, let's go look at some of these buffalo bulls. So while I was checking for tracks, walking up and down, they were watching me very carefully. Thank you very much, Maggie in Australia, who says I've been doing so well to let go of my addiction to the word so. I've only used it 9 times in the last couple of segments, and she would like to know whether the cameramen have been a bit nervous, obviously, because there was a lion around here earlier. Hello, big boy. So thanks very much, Maggie. And Maggie was wondering whether they'd been using the big stick formula to hit me every time I do it. I think this morning was too cold for any of that. I forgot the stick. And VM forgot the stick, fortunately for me. So these buffalo were sleeping up where those others are in the background. Even when that lioness was here, and in the background you can hear Juma waking up. Everyone is starting their day, and we're about to finish ours, or morning at least. It is absolutely gorgeous at this time of the morning. The light is quite spectacular. So move forward slightly. Some very pretty light on the doves drinking at the waterhole. No, they took off as we got here, unfortunately. Oh, but there's a green pigeon. Are you okay there, Vim? You got him? Oh, she's right here. Okay, I've got her calling. Right here, that lioness. She might be coming back towards the water. It sounds like she's on Winterboer Road. Is there anything behind us, Vim? That was very, very close, that call. So we're going to rush across there. I think she's no more than 100 or so meters away from us. She might not be on the road yet. Maybe she ran into that block. I did see some tracks around there. They weren't the clearest though. Or it could even be another lion. You never know. Hoppa, over the bump. Very bumpy in this vehicle. Bump, 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 bump. She was probably watching VM and I walk around trying to find her. So it sounded like she was just to the northeast of the road around here. Come on, give us a little call. I'm trying to say, even if she disturbs some birds. Just take a little. This is where it's important to not be too over eager. So, especially in this vehicle, which is very noisy, my ears are going to find this lioness before my eyes. So while we're going to sit here quietly and listen, let's go have a look at what James and Stefan are doing next to the fire.
Things have warmed up a bit. As you can see, my face is now bathed in what was golden light, and it's now rather blinding, palish, yellow, whitish light. And how Steph's managing without the aid of a hat, I'm not really sure. I can see Jamie driving around there. Brent is basically over the back of your head, where you happen to be watching the screen. I worked that out. Yes, that's correct. He's just to the east of us, into the sun that is now scorching my eyeballs out of the front of my face. Now, we have a nice question from Sherry about, you say, I think you're a little confused about the seasons here. You say there's a dry season and a wet season, so when do people grow anything? Because it's either very wet or it's very dry. Sherry, first of all, our wet season is not really that wet, is it? I mean, the average rainfall in this area is between 450 and 600 millimeters of rain. 600 millimeters is 24 inches, so that's not a huge amount at all. 450 millimeters is 18 inches of rain. So I mean, there's not a huge amount of rain, and that's the growing season. That's when we try and grow crops out here. Any time sort of after the first rains, which might be, what could be any time from October.
Although I know from my wife's vegetable garden that tropical fruit, she's trying to grow granadillas in our garden, and they have suggested that we grow it in winter rather than in summer, because it's just too hot. You can't give them enough water. So there's definitely enough sunlight here to do crops year round.
Year round, yeah.
So complementary crops, but I don't know what the guys plant.
And water is the limiting factor, of course, and so is heat. So many people, if they have water around the place, they will grow vegetable gardens in the winter and not in summer. They'll grow maize in the summertime because the heat doesn't seem to affect them much. But just north of here, on the Letaba River, there are a whole lot of commercial farms, and it's one of the only areas in the country where you can grow crops year-round. Yeah, all year round you can grow vegetables. So, yeah, if you can get enough water onto your crops, you can grow stuff year-round. It's never too wet to plant anything here. You're
The
never
odd
going
occasion,
to, you're never going to find a rice paddy in any of the areas out here. Then I found, well, I didn't really find it. I mean, he's been sat there all day. I tried to bring this sort of buffalo skull to bear, and unfortunately his horn came off. But it's quite a nice way of having a look here of what a horn looks like. And if you look into the middle of it, Chandra, can you see the middle of it? Yes. This is just the keratin sheath, everybody, of the horn, and inside it is where the bone would have gone. Now, I think this bone has been eaten away, Steph.
Yeah, definitely looks like
Because
it.
it's not on the thing there. Now, what would have eaten the bone?
It's gnawed on by so many different things.
Yeah.
I think, it could be anything. I mean, I would even imagine termites to a degree would
Yes.
even eat. It's quite high in calcium and potassium bone, and is obviously broken down eventually by rain and sun and water.
Well, that's quite interesting because in here, I mean, Chandra, if you don't mind, in there again, you can see that slightly discoloured greyish soil. And that certainly does look like termite mound to me. And I wonder if this hasn't actually, the bone's probably been eaten out by termites. It wasn't anything largely carnivorous because, well, they wouldn't have been able to get at it. So I'll just show you where it was attached. Chandra, if you might follow me. I don't want you to strain yourself. I know you've been sat there for many hours now. But it was attached like that, and the bone from the skull actually grows outward like that, and then it's covered in this keratin sheath. And so the termites have probably got in there, and they've eaten it out. And what's also interesting, of course, and many of you will know this, are these keratophagous moths. And that's keratin-eating moths. And I'm going to ask Steph to tell you about them because I always get this story a bit mixed up. Are you au fait with?
I can try. I mean, I don't quite know exactly. So this is a moth. This is actually what you're looking at over here is the pupae of the moth's caterpillar just before he became a moth. So he would have come out of the horn, had enough energy to pupate and turn into a moth, leaving this little cocoon basically, or the leftovers of the cocoon, and then flown off to find another horn. And I think on that note, we can cross over to Jamie, who's got some news for you.
With a horn.
We've come through and found a bachelor herd of impala, and I'm trying to show you again, but Rusty refuses to go into reverse, but there we go. Dark in colour, exceptionally fluffed up after the cold morning air, and accompanied by the fork-tailed drongos, fresh out of bed, or at least from roosting in the trees, and fluttering about trying to capitalise on breakfast. And when they're all puffed up like this, you can really see where impala get their Afrikaans name, the rooibok, or redbuck, because they do take on this incredible rich dark colour, especially when they're all puffed up and cold. All right, guys, over to Brent. He's found our lioness.
Success! We've got one of the lionesses here, another one. They haven't found each other. They're looking for each other, and this is the calling we've been hearing. So she's just here. Located Tumafazi Ngala on Mvubu Road, just to the north of the dam. Look at her. So the other one's actually going the opposite direction. And you can see this is one of the ones that have babies. You can see the suckle marks. So the other one's just gone off towards Gallagher, and this one's running in the wrong direction now. Don't go that way. Come back this way. Now let's just see if she might pick up the scent of the other one that's been going the opposite direction. There we go, she's changed direction again. Oh no, don't go east. So the other lioness is heading towards Gallagher Pan, from what I could see, but she disappeared in some thicket. Might hear a little call shortly. We're not going to be able to follow her into there. It's very, very thick and steep where she's going. She's still standing, or she's moved him? Oh, she's moving. Coming back this way. What they need is a little contact call. Come on, guys. Been talkative all morning. Oh, look at that. How beautiful is that with the backlight? Absolutely gorgeous. So she's definitely trying to talk with the other lioness I just saw disappear. They must have missed each other by 50 meters. You see her still, Liam? There she is. Okay, she's running. She's gone into that little thicket. Let's see. Okay, I'm just catching movement of her as she dashes through. She might pop out right around here. There you go. She's going to pop up right next to us. Hello, big girl. Shame you're looking for your friends. They went the other way. Oh, she's on the move again. Bouncy bounce. Look at her go. So they've just missed each other. The other lioness has gone directly the opposite direction. She's seems very excited to see one of the other members of the pride. She's probably not seen them for quite a while she's had these cubs hidden. Now let's see if she tries a contact call. Oh, isn't that beautiful? There we go, listen. Oh, look at that light on her face.
Jawohl. Ja, die 12 weiter von Sender.
So she's heading now towards the dam, Cam, or opposite it directly. She might go into the little river system that runs in front of the lodge. So I think we're gonna extend a little bit and just stay with her. I just think it could be really fantastic while she's on the move now. If we see them meet up, and then now she's spotted.